everyone, Novels Wonderland here. Thank you all for the love and support you've shown me and the channel.
Lord of the Mysteries, but Naruto, novel summary. The combination of magic potions and chakra, the clash between gods and Otsutsuki, the struggle between consciousnesses, the choice between life and death, and the souls from distant dimensions. What changes will these bring to a predetermined future universe? P.S. In this book, many people will switch to chakra cultivation, which will significantly alter the original character's behavioral rules, making out-of-character, OOC, situations inevitable. Chapter 1 to 10, The World in the Mirror, for K, Magic Mirror, awaken. In the name of the Hall family, I command you to awaken. Inside a room on the second floor of a luxurious villa, a beautiful woman in a home gown sat before a dressing table, talking to a bronze mirror. In the center of the bronze mirror was a distinct crack, and surrounding it, and on the back were ancient, simple patterns. Father really was lying to me. Every time, he tells me this mirror is a treasure of the ancient Solomon Empire's Black Emperor, a beyonder item. The young girl's words carried a hint of dissatisfaction, causing her cheeks to puff out slightly while her fingers unconsciously twirled her flowing blonde hair. But before she could finish, the bronze mirror in front of her suddenly burst with a deep crimson light, instantly enveloping her. A vast collection of novels is waiting for you. On an island within the endless void, Lewis, who was boredly digging through the dirt while lying on the roots of a giant tree, suddenly noticed a deep crimson light appear in this nearly eternal and unchanging space. The deep crimson light flashed and vanished, yet it still caught Lewis's attention. He bolted upright from the roots and ran toward where the light had appeared, completely disregarding his image. Reaching the destination, he found a window, about the size of a small washbasin, had appeared in the void. Inside the window was a blonde girl who appeared to be unconscious. Lewis reached out to touch the window, only to find he couldn't extend his hand through it. He experimented further after that, but all his attempts ended in failure. Strangely, no matter what Lewis did on his side of the window, the girl on the other side remained motionless, staring blankly ahead with vacant eyes. "Hey, can you see me? What's going on? Wait, could it be that time is stopped on the other side?" Lewis muttered to himself, but it didn't change the fact that there was no response from the other side. He kept at it until he grew tired, then stopped to carefully observe the situation on the other side of the window. Only then did he notice that the girl before him wasn't completely still. Her chest rose and fell slightly with her breathing. With this discovery, Lewis found it even stranger. If time wasn't stopped, and her breathing frequency didn't seem much different from the flow of time on his side, why wasn't she moving? She couldn't be in a vegetative state, could she? While people in a vegetative state can move or even scratch an itch, they lack activity due to being unconscious for so long, so their bodies would show various degrees of deterioration. But this girl's complexion is quite good, she doesn't look like a patient at all. It's hard to say. Judging by her attire and the room's decor, she must be from a wealthy family. It's also possible her family is rich enough to hire many caregivers and family doctors to help her perform regular exercises at home. Although the girl inside the window was just sitting motionless in her chair, which was quite boring to watch, Lewis still chose to stand there and observe. After all, compared to this suddenly appearing window, the surrounding void was even more boring. He didn't know exactly how much time had passed when Lewis suddenly noticed a change in the girl. The deep crimson light that had drawn him there earlier reappeared. It seemed to burst directly out of the void and eventually envelop the girl. At the moment the crimson light appeared, Lewis noticed the girl come to her senses, and her body began to move again. Finally, the light swirled around her and condensed into a star-like tattoo on the back of her hand, which eventually faded in color, sank into her skin, and vanished. "Hey, hello." Seeing the girl regain consciousness, Lewis called out a greeting to her. But this action startled the girl, causing her to scream outright. Although she immediately covered her mouth with her hand, the sound still carried. A moment later, a flurry of hurried footsteps could be heard from outside her door. "Miss, I just heard you scream. Did something happen?" "Ah, cough, it's nothing. A bug flew in through the window, but it's gone now." It was unclear if the person outside really believed her, but they didn't push the door open. After a few seconds' pause, they continued. "It's time to get ready to go out. May I come in?" In that short time, the girl calmed her emotions. Looking back at the bronze mirror where the figure had suddenly appeared, she saw that the person was gone, replaced by a giant tree. She placed the bronze mirror face down on the table and quickly adjusted her clothes to ensure nothing looked amiss before speaking again. "All right, Annie, come in." No sooner had she spoken than the doorknob was turned from the outside, and the personal maid named Annie walked in. As the maid entered, her eyes quickly scanned the room. Seeing nothing unusual, she felt relieved. The maid walked up to the girl, her gaze sweeping over the face-down bronze mirror on the table. She didn't find this strange. After all, every time the young lady heard her father tell stories about the Black Emperor, she would come to look at this mirror. Clearly, now was no exception. Seeing that Annie only glanced at the mirror without noticing anything unusual, the girl secretly breathed a sigh of relief. This moment was easily the most thrilling of her life. Just a moment ago, she had been pulled into a mysterious space by an unknown entity and experienced a mystical adventure. The next, she saw her own bronze mirror, which usually showed nothing unusual, suddenly reflecting images. But now, she had to act perfectly calm, as if nothing had happened. "Which dress would you like to wear?" The maid's words interrupted her thoughts, bringing her attention back to the present. She thought for a moment. "I like the one Mrs. Ginnia designed for my 17th birthday." But the maid refused. "No, wearing a dress a second time to a formal occasion will make others suspect if the Hall family is facing a financial crisis. If you really like it, you can wear it on unimportant occasions or at home, but not at a public formal event." The girl didn't insist. As a member of the nobility, she understood this logic. The magnificent clothes they wore were not merely garments to cover the body, they were more like armor protecting each family member. In banquets and social settings, nobles could gauge the state of another's family to some extent by scrutinizing and identifying their attire. It was like two male lions observing if the other's mane was still thick, and if their fur had wounds. Once an opening appeared, they would be targeted. They might even be swarmed by a pack of hyenas, eventually ending up with their flesh and blood carved up. Thus, after a barely perceptible sigh, the girl maintained her smile. "In that case, let's go with the one Mr. Seds sent the day before yesterday, the one with ruffles on the cuffs." On the other side of the window, Louis was currently hunched over, eavesdropping on the conversation between the girls. Unfortunately, while he could hear the conversation, he couldn't understand a word they were saying. "What language is this? I've never heard it before." Although Louis hadn't even passed the CET, for by graduation, thanks to the internet, he had heard bits and pieces of various languages from around the world. However, the language the girls were using was something he had never encountered. "Though I've definitely transmigrated, seeing her clothes earlier, I thought I was in Europe. But now it seems it's an otherworldly realm." Well, with a tree like this and the void, an alternate world was a given anyway. Even so, Louis hadn't reached a final conclusion. After all, a commoner like him had no way of knowing if his original world had a hidden underworld. But now, listening to this conversation in a language completely foreign to him, he finally accepted that he had transmigrated to another world. Sigh, I wonder how my Akai is doing. Who would have thought that walking a dog could lead to an explosion? Speaking of which, what was that explosion about? There was clearly nothing around me. Could it have been an underground gas pipe? But there weren't even any open flames. How could I be so unlucky? Every time Louis thought about it, he felt speechless. He had been walking his pet Shiba Inu, Akai, as usual. Then, an explosion occurred abruptly beside him. When he opened his eyes again, he was here, on this island floating in the void. Aside from Louis, there was only a single towering giant tree on the island. The tree had thick, gnarled roots and a straight, upright trunk, but it lacked any branches or leaves. At the very top of the giant tree was a massive flower bud. The moment he woke up, he felt a surge of knowledge and memories flooding his mind. The only problem was that this knowledge and these memories were so vast that Lewis's original life seemed as tiny as a ping-pong ball on Earth in comparison. This meant that Lewis needed a massive amount of time to understand and analyze those memories and knowledge. However, based on what he currently understood, he had a general idea of his situation. This brings us to a background figure from Naruto. His name is Otsutsuki Shirbai. As the god of the Otsutsuki clan, he lived for thousands or even tens of thousands of years. During that time, he used the Otsutsuki clan's unique god tree to convert various energies in the universe into unified chakra. Members of the Otsutsuki clan plant god trees on life-bearing planets across the universe, then simply wait for the tree to bloom and bear fruit before sending the fruit back to the clan. Each fruit of the god tree usually represents the demise of a life-bearing planet. Yet, in his lifetime, Otsutsuki Shirbai consumed countless god tree fruits. Finally, under the effect of a massive amount of god tree fruits, quantitative change led to qualitative change. Otsutsuki Shirbai's power increased further until he eventually discarded his physical body, his soul transforming into data, and departing from his original dimension. Perhaps because the energy consumed in crossing dimensions was too great, Otsutsuki Shirbai turned into a data stream and entered Lewis's body. As for the giant tree behind him, it was the god tree owned by Otsutsuki Shirbai. This island was actually a world created by Otsutsuki Shirbai using Shinjutsu, one that belonged solely to him and could be controlled at will. However, as Otsutsuki Shirbai consumed more and more power during the dimensional crossing, this once small world gradually turned into its current desolate state. Since Otsutsuki Shirbai was now residing within Lewis's body, Lewis could use the other's power to some extent, but this usage came at a price. To use an analogy, Otsutsuki Shirbai was like a compressed file that had been decompressing ever since it entered Lewis's body. But the content of this compressed file was so massive that the decompression progress bar was extremely long, potentially spanning hundreds or even thousands of years. Every time Lewis used Otsutsuki Shirbai's power, it was equivalent to actively speeding up the analysis progress. Lewis could gain greater power this way after all, it was the power of a being capable of crossing dimensions, and even in a diminished state, it was incomparable. Correspondingly, it meant shortening his own lifespan, because once the compressed file inside him was fully decompressed, he would completely become Otsutsuki Shirbai. Lewis found this difficult to accept at first. But during his time trapped here alone, he gradually came to terms with it. Before he turned into Otsutsuki Shirbai, he likely had several hundred or even 1,000 years. During this time, possessing power and abilities far beyond his original self was a stroke of immense luck in itself. Thus, in his helplessness, Lewis persuaded himself to accept his future fate. But just as Lewis had accepted his fate, and was preparing to enjoy his powerful, centuries-long life before his death, he discovered he couldn't leave this place at all. First of all, he wasn't Otsutsuki Shirbai. Even if he could borrow power, the effectiveness was worlds apart. His control over this space was very low, only allowing it to move slowly through the void. Secondly, Lewis found that the void outside the space was also very strange, it had no sense of up, down, left or right. Moving here was purely a matter of luck. He might move a few hundred meters to the left one moment, only to abruptly end up 1,000 meters to the right the next. In the end, Lewis was either spinning in place or ending up in unknown locations without knowing how. The problem was that the void outside looked more or less the same to Lewis, as if he had never moved at all. But things were different now. The moment that window opened, this space captured a set of coordinates. Now, Lewis was no longer like a headless fly bumping around in the void, he finally had a clear objective. Chapter 2, 6 Paths, 4K. Sitting on a chair temporarily woven from the roots of the god tree, Lewis kept his eyes tightly shut, his entire mind focused on controlling the movement of this space. To sense the coordinates more precisely, he sat just below and to the side of that window. From this position, he could see the window, while ensuring the other party couldn't see him directly. After getting over his initial excitement, Lewis regained his composure. This set of coordinates was hard won, he had no idea when he might encounter another. As such, until he moved the space to the coordinates, he shouldn't let more people discover him. Although he could borrow the power of Otsutsuki Shirbai, the god of dimension crossing. However, he didn't know the situation on the other side. Even if they couldn't do anything to him, the red light on that boy earlier suggested it wasn't an ordinary world. What if they had some means to erase the coordinates he'd found or cut off his only channel to the outside world? Then he wouldn't know how much longer he'd have to stay in this little black room. On the other hand, while he couldn't let more people find him, he still had to try and communicate with that girl from before. After all, she had seen him. If he couldn't pacify her, she might very well tell others. However, after about half an hour of activity in her room during which 7 or 8 women and finally a man with a deep voice came, and it went silent. After that, Louis waited anxiously within the space. While controlling the spatial movement, he worried, wondering if the girl's long absence meant she had gone to find help to deal with him. What he didn't know was that the girl had simply gone with her family to the harbor for a ceremony, the ribbon cutting for an imperial ironclad. Sounds had actually come from the other side of the window, but because the mirror was face down, he couldn't tell what was happening. Whenever this happened, Louis would divert some energy, trying to see what was going on. But in the end, he saw nothing, only hearing some faint rustling sounds from the room. In reality, those were just the sounds of a maid cleaning the manor and dragging a chair. Since there were no temporal reference points in the void space, Louis didn't know exactly how long he had waited. "All right, Annie. Don't worry about the dress yet. First, take off this veiled hat and jewelry, my neck is getting a bit sore from the weight." A sweet, cheerful voice came from behind the window. Louis immediately sat up straight in his wooden chair. He knew the person he was waiting for had returned. Today's ironclad launching ceremony had been personally attended by King George III and his family of the Kingdom of Loan. After touring the ironclad and witnessing this imperial blade, the nobles had also attended a small banquet. Because the attendees that afternoon had watched the ironclad sail at high speeds, seen its cannons fire in unison at a deserted island, and finally listened to a long speech by the kingdom's prime minister, Agyud. The final banquet didn't last very long, and some entertainment activities were cut short. The attendees didn't mind, as the conversation at the banquet centered on the ironclad they had seen that afternoon. Some saw a further increase in the Royal Navy's influence, while others saw business opportunities. After seeing that behemoth over 100 meters long, 20 meters wide, and 6 or 7 meters above the waterline with their own eyes, even the ladies who usually had no interest in such things couldn't hide their excitement. Especially when those 4 305mm main guns fired simultaneously, the sheer sound alone shook their very souls. They used to hear the men at banquets talk about the battlefield and how brave they were, as if cannons and guns were nothing to nobles like them. But today, they gained a clear concept of just how terrifying those cannons were and how ridiculously the men had been boasting. The girl's entire process of removing her makeup and changing back into a home gown took nearly an hour. Once all the maids left the room, the girl felt just as curious about what was behind the window as Louis did. In the past, though she had heard her father and brothers speak of beyonder matters, she had never actually experienced them. But today, she had first attended a private gathering hosted by a mysterious existence, and then activated what was said to be a treasure of the ancient Solomon Empire's Black Emperor. At this moment, she felt like the protagonist of a novel, so she didn't tell her family, and instead prepared to investigate on her own. The girl took a deep breath, mentally preparing herself before moving the dust veil covering the back of the bronze mirror, and flipping it to the front. When she once again saw images that shouldn't be there reflected on the dull yellow surface of the mirror, she confirmed she hadn't been dreaming during the day. Magic mirror, hello. I was out for a while earlier, it's not that I didn't want to talk to you. The girl cautiously greeted what she believed to be a magic mirror, explaining she hadn't intentionally ignored it. Hearing the voice and seeing the scene across the window change from wood grain back to the luxuriously decorated bedroom, Louis tilted his head slightly to check the situation. Once he confirmed only the girl was on the other side, Louis stood up from his chair and walked directly in front of the window. Hearing Lewis speak, the girl felt a bit awkward because she realized she couldn't understand him. Could it be ancient Fasak from the Solomon Empire era? But it doesn't sound like it. Over the next few moments, both parties on either side of the window tried out several languages they knew. Unfortunately, neither could understand the other. Lewis found this hard to accept. Without a common language, she might seek help elsewhere. And his chance to escape this endless void might be severed forever. Just then, an idea struck him. He stepped forward to the window and pressed his palm against it. The girl immediately understood Lewis's intent, but she hesitated. After all, in her mind, she had only planned to have a chat with this magic mirror. Though curious about the beyonder world, her upbringing told her not to act impulsively. At that moment, many thoughts raced through her mind, mostly from the novels and stories she had read. Comparing it to those stories, her current experience seemed like a fortuitous encounter. However, she also understood that along with fortuitous encounters came the possibility of traps. Ultimately, her curiosity about the beyonder world won out by a narrow margin. But she wasn't unprepared. She reached out with her left hand to grab the bell on the corner of the table, so she could ring it immediately to attract attention if anything went wrong. After psyching herself up, she finally reached out her right hand and pressed it against the mirror's surface. Their palms didn't touch, an invisible barrier stood between them. Lewis had expected this. He had tried to leave the moment the window appeared but failed. Now, as a last-ditch effort, Lewis closed his eyes and began to mobilize the chakra within his body. Under his control, the barrier between their palms grew thinner and thinner. What Lewis was trying to do was squeeze the entire space through the window. He felt he should be able to do it, but it required greater strength and more control over this space. Unfortunately, Lewis possessed neither at the moment. But he reasoned that if he could squeeze the whole space through once he got stronger. Could he squeeze out just a small part, like a palm, while his strength was still insufficient? With Lewis's full effort, he indeed felt the barrier thinning. The problem was that the barrier was too resilient. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't break through. Fortunately, once the barrier was thin to a certain degree, while he couldn't pass through, his chakra could. A moment later, chakra flowed from Lewis's palm, permeated the barrier, and finally entered the girl's palm. Chakra, simply put, is a combination of physical energy and spiritual power, thus, it has the ability to connect hearts and minds. Hearing the voice in her mind, the girl's mouth fell open in surprise. She spoke out loud instinctively but quickly realized her mistake and switched to responding in her mind. "Audrey, how can you be so silly? Clearly, this Mr. Magic Mirror is speaking with his mind. You should do the same. Like thinking hello in your head. Wait, can he hear everything I'm thinking right now?" Seeing the crinkle in Lewis's eyes and the corners of his mouth twitching as he tried to suppress a smile, the girl named Audrey knew she had guessed correctly. "Ah, it's over. This is so embarrassing. Don't think about it anymore." In that moment, Audrey wanted to pull her hand back and stop this embarrassing behavior. Sensing her intent, Lewis immediately changed his expression, becoming incredibly solemn. "Hello, Miss Audrey." Hello, sir. I am Audrey Hall. How should I address you?" Since connecting to her mind with chakra, Lewis hadn't been idle for a second. He was rapidly absorbing her stray thoughts, gathering information about her world. Among them was the scene she cared about most, being pulled into a private gathering by a hidden existence that afternoon. In a short time, Lewis gained a basic understanding of this world. There were means to pull a person's soul or spirit from their body to attend meetings remotely. There were concrete beyonder legacies and organizations like the Church of the Evernight Goddess and the Church of the Lord of Storms active in the world. Most importantly, Lewis noticed the girl's attitude toward that unknown existence. Cautious, fearful, and excited. At that moment an idea came to Lewis. "You may call me Six Paths." Six Paths? What a strange name. No, I don't mean you, Mr. Six Paths, I mean. It couldn't be helped, ordinary people find it hard to restrain their thoughts. Often, the more they try not to think about something, the more they do. For instance, Lewis now felt her stuffing a mass of jumbled thoughts into his mind all at once. Lewis had to ignore it and proactively offer a new topic, otherwise, she would keep thinking endlessly. It's fine. It's normal that you don't recognize the name, few people mention it nowadays. If I hadn't sensed the power of a certain existence earlier, I wouldn't have followed the trail here. The power of a certain existence. Does he mean could Mr. Six Paths and Mr. Fool be enemies? Oh no, will I be caught in a game between hidden existences because of this? Audrey, oh Audrey, I told you to be cautious with the supernatural. I hope this doesn't involve father, mother, and my brothers. Listening to her increasingly stray thoughts, Lewis almost lost his composure. Don't worry. I've observed that the one who exerted power on you isn't the one I know, they're just slightly similar. Is that so? That's wonderful. Audrey, you don't have to die. Our meeting is a matter of fate. I heard your thoughts earlier, you are curious about Beyonder powers, aren't you? If you're willing, I can grant you a portion of power. Six Paths is so kind. Wait, could there be a conspiracy? No, such a kind existence as Mr. Six Paths couldn't possibly have a conspiracy. Realizing her thoughts were being monitored, Audrey actually managed to rein in her wandering mind through sheer willpower and a desire to survive. There's no need to be nervous. I'm not forcing anything, whether you accept is up to you. However, I must say beforehand that this power is different from what you know. It doesn't rely on consuming potions but requires study and cultivation. While not as direct as potions, this power has its own characteristics, namely its diverse range of abilities. Things like fire breathing, water manipulation, wind riding, and lightning control, all of these are possible. Chapter 3, Family Treasury, 4K. When Audrey heard Lewis's words, she subconsciously thought of what Mr. Hangman had said this afternoon. If humans want to become true Beyonders, they can only rely on potions, and the names of these potions come from the blasphemy slate. Well, although Mr. Hangman seems quite credible, and can casually produce 2 sequence 9 formulas, he is probably still inferior to Mr. Six Paths. From this perspective, it must be that the information Mr. Hangman knows is limited, and he doesn't know there are other ways to obtain extraordinary power besides potions. This time, Lewis did not interrupt, instead, he allowed Audrey to think. This was because he also wanted to take this opportunity to learn more about the supernatural system of this world. One must know that chakra is a highly inclusive power that can combine with different environments to create various new powers, such as Sage Chakra. He felt that if he understood this world well enough, he should be able to combine chakra with the power of this realm to create yet another new type of energy. And this was, in fact, very important to Lewis. Mainly because the power Lewis could use essentially came at the cost of his own life. Every time he used an extra portion of power, it was equivalent to actively undoing part of Otsutsuki Shirbai's seal, bringing himself one step closer to death. Conversely, if he could combine chakra with the power of this world to create something like Sage Chakra, it would be equivalent to extending his life in a roundabout way. After all, even if 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2, it's still greater than 1. When the time came, 1 part chakra plus 1 part local energy would exert greater power when combined, allowing him to borrow less of Otsutsuki Shirbai's power. In this way, while listening to the various thoughts of the young girl before him, Lewis also began to organize the information. The supernatural system of this world was somewhat similar to some Western fantasy warlock novels he had read before, where warlocks needed to consume potions and construct corresponding magic in their minds to advance. The potion system of this entire world was somewhat similar to that, yet also different. As far as the young girl knew, those potions themselves seemed to carry power, drinking different potions would grant different powers. From this point of view, it was somewhat similar to genetic mutation, gaining superpowers. After listening for a while, Lewis stopped dwelling on it. After all, the girl in front of him was clearly a rookie, the information she knew might be incorrect or one-sided. If he were to draw conclusions now, he might very well be digging a hole for himself, he needed more knowledge. To achieve this goal, he needed to hurry to the coordinates and look at the books there. Indeed, despite the short amount of time, Lewis had already learned her language and script from Audrey through their mental connection. He felt quite emotional about this. If he had possessed this ability back then, taking the level 4 exam wouldn't have been so painful. Seeing the girl struggling and hesitating to make a decision, because she was afraid her inner thoughts would be known by him, Lewis decided to ease up and not press her so hard, lest he actually scare her away. It's okay if you can't make a decision. As I said, I'm only giving you a chance because there is some fate between us. I saw that you made an agreement with someone else to receive a potion formula next week, right? I'll give you the cultivation method now. As for which one you ultimately choose, that's up to you. As he spoke, the chakra Lewis had originally used only for mental communication began to circulate within Audrey's body. This is a chakra seed. I will use it as a template to let you experience what it means to extract chakra. First, clear your mind and let your spirit disperse naturally. With Lewis's step-by-step guidance, Audrey quickly refined her very first wisp of chakra. After completing all this, Lewis directly withdrew his hand. All right, I have taught you the method. Whether you choose it or not is no longer my concern. In the next moment, Lewis's figure disappeared from the bronze mirror, leaving only the giant tree as a background. Audrey felt the extremely weak chakra within her body, her heart surging with immense excitement. Audrey, this is extraordinary power. You have truly stepped across the threshold of the supernatural. But a moment later, fear rose in Audrey's heart. She had a shallow understanding of this supernatural world. Therefore, the moment her excitement passed, she began to worry that the chakra in her body was actually some kind of curse or trap set by the other party. She even thought of a novel she had read where a ghost entered someone's body, initially just an inconspicuous speck, but eventually completely replacing the entire person. Fortunately, after Audrey's observation, she found that the tiny bit of chakra had already mostly disappeared in just this short while. She then recalled Lewis telling her that refining chakra required diligent practice. Because chakra is composed of one's own physical and spiritual energy, even if it isn't used, simply staying in the body will cause it to decompose under the action of internal energy, reverting back into physical and spiritual energy. This means that as long as I don't actively refine it, I won't have chakra. Therefore, even if the other party really has some ulterior motives, they probably won't be able to implement them. Audrey comforted herself this way, and decided to put the matter aside for now. Over the next 2 days, she would carefully check some records to see if there truly were pathways to obtain supernatural power other than consuming potions. Although this still wouldn't answer all her doubts, at least it could let her know if the other party had lied to her about this matter. On the other side of the window, Lewis sat back in his chair, and began to manipulate space to move toward the coordinate location. This time, the speed of movement was even faster. Because when he helped Audrey refine chakra earlier, it was equivalent to leaving a mark on her. This mark was like a GPS that would send signals at regular intervals, while the original window was like a photo of the destination. Lewis was originally looking for the destination using the photo without knowing the way. Now that he had a GPS reporting the location, naturally 1 + 1 was far greater than 2. As for why Lewis taught her how to refine chakra after leaving the mark, firstly, it was compensation for reading her consciousness. Even though she was unaware of it, he still felt a bit bad about it. Secondly, as the god of the Otsutsuki clan, Otsutsuki Shirbai's control over chakra far exceeded common logic. It could be said that any trace of chakra in this world would be sensed by him. Although Lewis was not the same as Otsutsuki Shirbai, he still inherited a portion of his abilities. In this case, if Audrey chose to refine chakra, it would be equivalent to attaching a signal amplifier to the original GPS. Because she had things on her mind, Audrey went to the family treasury early the next day after finishing breakfast. It couldn't be helped, although Audrey had been interested in occult-related matters since childhood, and had met many friends with the same hobby in aristocratic circles. And they would exchange information, books, and various rare items. Before yesterday, none of them had truly come into contact with or obtained supernatural abilities, let alone become a real beyonder. There were a few princes who had hinted to her during banquet encounters that if she were willing to become a princess consort, she would receive the gifts she desired. Although Audrey did not agree because of this, it also indirectly confirmed that supernatural powers existed in this world. Just yesterday, she finally experienced it personally. Now, what she had to do was find the ghost shark blood that Mr. Hangman wanted and mail it to the specified location. Unfortunately, Audrey's own collection did not contain ghost shark blood. So she turned her attention to the family treasury, planning to check if the items inside included the ghost shark blood she wanted. If not, Audrey might have to find a way to purchase it later to complete the transaction for the Sequence 9 Spectator Potion formula. In addition, she also wanted to look at the secret documents stored inside to find any records regarding the Fool and Six Paths. It must be said that the family of Earl Hall, where Audrey belonged, was indeed one of the wealthiest great noble families in the Lone Kingdom. The family's treasury was very rich, even beyonder materials like ghost shark blood were in their collection. Moreover, given that Mr. Hangman had asked for exactly 100 milliliters, ghost shark blood was clearly a very precious and scarce resource. But in the treasury of Earl Hall's family, such a beyonder material was registered on the list as one large bottle. Yes, there was no record of how many milliliters it was, nor whether it was half a bottle or a full bottle. In any case, after Audrey looked at it, she quietly used a measuring flask to take 100 milliliters, only to find that it was less than 1/6 of the original large bottle. According to Audrey's estimation, the original volume of the large bottle should have been more than 700 milliliters. As long as one wasn't paying deliberate attention, a casual inspection would never notice the difference. Of course, even if the family did find out, Audrey believed her family wouldn't pursue the matter. Seeing that she had completed half of her goal all at once, Audrey's mood lightened considerably. She even began to fantasize about the future where, after exchanging for the spectator formula, she would use it to observe the actions of other nobles at various banquets. But things were not all smooth sailing. Audrey did not find any information regarding the Fool and Six Paths in the family documents, which inevitably made her a bit uneasy. However, she wasn't entirely without gains. In one of the documents, a very vague piece of information was recorded. In Audrey's view, this information seemed more like a myth. It told of a creator who, at the cost of himself, created the entire world. His flesh, blood, and soul evolved into all kinds of living beings in the world, with only his consciousness remaining, which also entered a deep slumber. Creatures such as vampires, demonic wolves, merfolk, giants, elves, humans, and so on, were all created by that creator god. The era when this creator created all living beings was called the First Epoch, which was a dark epoch for humanity. Humans at that time, just like now, had no supernatural powers, but all other living beings possessed their own various abilities. Therefore, humans lived very difficult lives back then, almost reduced to food or playthings for other races. It was also thanks to the fact that those races at the time didn't get along and killed each other incessantly, which gave humans a chance to survive in the cracks. Those races grew stronger or weaker through conquest, and later, the leaders of the 8 strongest races became ancient gods and established empires and civilizations belonging to their own races. Thereafter, civilization entered the Second Epoch. The 8 ancient gods divided into opposing camps, forming a new balance. Most regions entered a degree of peace, and the oscillation between turmoil and peace lasted for nearly 1,000 years. During this epoch, humans became vassals to those ancient gods' dependents, and in the process, they learned how to utilize the supernatural from those dependents. 1,000 years later, the peace between the ancient gods was broken. The gods engaged in the most primitive slaughter, and ultimately, all the ancient gods fell. The Third Epoch began, and humans utilized the supernatural abilities they had learned before to gradually become the masters of the world. Most supernatural creatures began to move away from the continent, living in the peripheral areas. In this epoch, the Creator's consciousness briefly revived and confirmed the situation in the world. Not only did he recognize the status of humans, but he also left behind a blasphemy slate. It was said that after the Creator saw the supernatural powers humans were using at the time, he found them too laughable, so he specially left it behind to guide the way. Later, the creator's consciousness fell silent once again, and the third epoch also came to an end. When the creator's consciousness originally awoke, he had 7 angels serving him. But after the creator's consciousness fell silent, those 7 angels divided the world's authority and became the new gods. The 7 gods walked upon the earth, establishing their own divine kingdoms on earth, and just like the ancient gods of the second epoch, they fought among themselves. This struggle lasted for thousands of years, and in the end, the battles between the gods even shattered the continent. Realizing that continuing this way would destroy the entire world, the 7 gods reached a consensus to no longer descend to the mortal realm, but instead reside high within their divine kingdoms. Thus, the 5th epoch began. This is truly blasphemous. After reading this document, Audrey's mind was filled with nothing but this sentence. One must know that her entire family were devout believers of the Evernight goddess, and in this document, the Evernight goddess was actually described as a thief who stole the creator's authority. Naturally, this was unacceptable to her. However, she also saw a piece of information in it that she cared about very much: the blasphemy slate. Chapter 4, The Blasphemy Slate, 4K. Setting aside the mystical knowledge Audrey had originally acquired, just yesterday at Mr. Fool's mysterious banquet, that very knowledgeable Mr. Hangman had spoken about matters regarding the blasphemy slate. The names of the potions come from the blasphemy slate. Through the continuous translation from the giant language, Elvish, ancient Hermes, ancient Faesac, to contemporary Hermes, they have long since undergone changes that fit the characteristics of the era. Looking at it this way, although the content in this book is quite blasphemous toward the gods, it should still have some reference value. Indeed, otherwise it wouldn't have been placed in the family treasury. But if potions really originated from the blasphemy slate, as recorded in the book, what kind of extraordinary power did people use before that? Could it be that what Mr. Six Paths gave me is this very ancient power? But if that's the case, then Mr. Six Paths couldn't possibly be a hidden existence that has existed since before the third epoch, could he? This is just too exciting. The young girl's thoughts drifted, but she actually didn't have much free time. She still had to go to class today, Friday. In fact, even on Saturdays and Sundays, there were private noble tutors to teach her knowledge. Not to mention there were other courses like dance, piano, painting, equestrianism, and so on, which almost filled Audrey's private time to the brim. Audrey, who left the family treasury just in time, had just arrived in the corridor when she felt a furry sensation against her calf, accompanied by a body temperature much higher than a human's. Audrey didn't even need to look to know what was going on. She immediately lifted her skirt slightly and crouched down. "Susie, you're already a little lady now. You can't crawl under my skirt like that." Susie was a golden retriever of somewhat impure blood, a free gift from when Earl Hall purchased a hunting dog worth tens of thousands of gold pounds. Counting it up, Susie was already 3 years old. She was very smart, able to understand many of Audrey's commands, and could even open closed doors by herself. Because of this, the unrestrainable Susie could find Audrey whenever she wanted, just like now. Susie ignored Audrey's words, merely panting with her mouth slightly open, her tail sweeping the floor like a long-haired brush. Looking at Susie's appearance, Audrey's originally slightly dissatisfied words instantly vanished, and she instead began stroking Susie's head with her hand. All right, just this once." Despite having her attention diverted by Susie, Audrey still remembered what she had to do, so she only spent a few minutes playing with her before standing up to leave again. She had to go to her etiquette class. Susie was already used to her master's business, and didn't pester her, only giving Audrey's calf a final nudge with her snout before turning to leave the corridor. Over the next few days, after taking the time to mail out the ghost shark blood, Audrey began to search through various materials with all her might. Unlike her previous aimless explorations, now that she had a clear goal, Audrey really did find a lot of information, though she couldn't tell if it was true or false. From those materials it appeared that besides potions, there were other channels through which one could obtain extraordinary powers, such as meditation and magic rituals. In this regard, what interested Audrey the most was meditation. After all, it was most similar to the chakra refining method Lewis had given her, both involving obtaining extraordinary power through one's own cultivation. Although she couldn't be completely certain yet, Audrey had begun to believe in Lewis from the bottom of her heart. However, out of a deep-seated caution, she still hadn't started cultivating, nor had she communicated with Lewis through the copper mirror again. Lewis didn't mind this; in any case, he had already left a signal source. Even if Audrey didn't refine chakra, he would simply arrive at the coordinates a little later. 3 days passed in a flash and Monday arrived. This day was the time previously agreed upon by the Fool for the next banquet. Inside her room, Audrey double-locked the door and sat upright in front of her dressing table. After some thought, she also placed the copper mirror to her front side, though the image within did not show Lewis's figure, but remained that of the towering giant tree. After finishing all this, she spread out a blank notebook bound in pale brown parchment on the table. She reached out and pressed down slightly on the pages to keep them open so they wouldn't close on their own. But the pages of the new notebook were relatively stiff, and without applying great pressure, the open pages still curled up slightly. In response, Audrey picked up the golden fountain pen inlaid with red gemstones from beside the notebook and pressed it down onto the pages. She tested it, confirming that she could immediately start recording the potion formula as soon as she left Mr. Fool's private gathering, and only then did she stop. Audrey took several deep breaths, suppressing her excited mood. Potions, they really are so intriguing. Through the targeted research of the past few days, Audrey had gained a better understanding of potions. Although she still hadn't found any explicit records, they basically all said that potions were the source of human extraordinary power. After considering it for a long time, Audrey felt that since this involved her future, she shouldn't be too impulsive. It would be best to wait until she got the spectator potion formula from the hangman, and then perform a comparison and trial. In the next moment, a crimson and illusory light abruptly appeared from the surface of Audrey's body and quickly enveloped her entire being. Correspondingly, Lewis, who was still driving within the void space, once again felt the red light that had caught his attention that day. Lewis went to the window in surprise to check, only to find that Audrey had once again turned into a doll-like figure without consciousness, sitting motionless in front of her dressing table. Is she off to attend that fool's banquet again? Although I don't yet have a full understanding of this world's situation, from what I've gathered from Audrey's mind, this kind of being should be considered an evil god, right? Maybe after Audrey comes back to her senses, I should give her a reminder. An existence like an evil god can't be anything good, no matter how you look at it. Lewis, however, had forgotten that, strictly speaking, his current state was also very similar to the evil gods Audrey knew about. About half an hour later, Audrey's expression regained its liveliness. Clearly, Mr. Fool's private gathering had ended. Audrey couldn't be bothered with anything else and immediately grabbed her fountain pen to record the spectator potion formula she had just obtained from the hangman in her notebook. It wasn't until the last word was written that Audrey breathed a long sigh of relief. She reviewed it several times to confirm she hadn't remembered it incorrectly before shifting her attention away. Only then did she notice Lewis's figure appearing in front of the copper mirror. Audrey, who had just relaxed, immediately became tense again. Mr. Six Paths, hello. At this point, she remembered once again that the other party did not know her language. Fool can understand both my and Mr. Hanged Man's words, while Mr. Six Paths doesn't understand at all. Does this mean Mr. Six Paths' existence is even more ancient? After thinking about it, Audrey dismissed her own idea. Not necessarily. After all, Mr. Fool's gathering is attended as spirit bodies. Perhaps he is also using an ability similar to Mr. Six Paths to directly hear our inner thoughts. Wait, that's not right. Audrey suddenly thought about whether the other party could also hear her inner thoughts. If that were the case, wouldn't she be losing face again? It was fortunate she had no disrespect for Mr. Fool in her heart. Calming her thoughts, Audrey thought about the information she had learned at the banquet earlier. After just a moment's hesitation, Audrey took the initiative this time, and reached out her right hand, pressing it directly against the window. Seeing this action, Lewis blinked. He didn't say that he had already learned her Loanese, but instead also reached out his right hand. Establishing the connection this time was actually much easier than before. Firstly, the distance between the two had closed significantly under Lewis's non-stop movement over the past few days, and secondly, she bore his mark. Long time no see, Mr. Sixpaths. Long time no see to you too, Miss Audrey. With just a brief greeting, Lewis had already followed her radiating thoughts, and learned many things about her experience at the banquet. Among them was the complete spectator potion formula. Regarding this, Lewis frowned slightly, because he noticed what that hangman had said about how consuming a potion could lead to losing control. Losing control, is it similar to something like cultivation deviation? In that case, this world's extraordinary system is quite dangerous. It seems my chakra will have quite a market. In fact, this was indeed the case. The reason Audrey had taken the initiative to communicate with him this time was because she wanted to discuss the issue of extraordinary loss of control. Audrey suddenly realized that before, she had only been thinking about which of these two extraordinary powers was stronger or weaker, and which one was more suitable for her. But at today's Fool's Banquet, after being reminded by Mr. Hangman, she once again remembered that extraordinary power also corresponded to danger. It was also because of that uncertain danger that she and those fellow noble enthusiasts back then had not easily attempted the various mystical matters they had found. Sixpaths, please forgive my presumption, but while I was recalling the chakra refining method you taught me, I found that it didn't mention how to deal with losing control. Therefore, I would like to ask. As Audrey spoke, she subconsciously thought of various extraordinary loss of control scenarios she had learned about, which gave Lewis a deeper understanding of it through her radiating thoughts. Adjusting his own thoughts, Lewis replied unhurriedly, losing control. You're talking about the extraordinary loss of control that occurs after taking a potion. Remember what I said before. The power I'm teaching you is different from others, it requires you to cultivate it yourself bit by bit. This is power that originates from your own self. Conversely, the power brought by those potions, while convenient, is ultimately external, and does not belong to your own self. To use an analogy for the two, chakra cultivation is like allowing you to make your muscles tougher, run faster, and jump higher through exercise. The power obtained through potions is like grafting an extra hand onto your original foundation. This extra hand doesn't belong to you, so naturally, all sorts of problems will arise. Do you understand what I mean by saying this? Audrey understood instantly and was very excited. Mr. Sixpaths, are you saying that refining chakra carries no risk of losing control? That's right. Besides, didn't I already take you through refining it once before? You should be familiar with that feeling. At this moment, Audrey's heart began to struggle. She was both moved by the safety of chakra and simultaneously enticed by the miraculous effects brought by this spectator potion. At this moment, Lewis also gained a better understanding of the spectator. A spectator possesses outstanding spirit and keen observation, examining the actors in secular society like a bystander. From their expressions, their behavior, their verbal habits, and their unknown movements, they glimpse their true thoughts, thereby subtly influencing and secretly guiding things to develop in the direction they desire. Regarding this, Lewis laughed directly in Audrey's mind. Ha ha ha, if you're struggling just because of something like this, then there's absolutely no need. As for strengthening one's 5 senses, chakra can do the same. Not only that, it can also do many more miraculous things. Besides the basic abilities I mentioned before like fire release, water release, wind release, earth release, and lightning release, chakra also provides reinforcement in mental aspects. For example, the mental communication I am currently having with you. Furthermore, there is a set of mind transfer series secret techniques that can allow you to intrude your spirit into the opponent's body, and even directly control the opponent's body to act according to your will, and so on. As Lewis explained, Audrey gained a deeper understanding of chakra. It was also at this time that her curiosity about chakra outweighed the spectator potion. This was entirely because Audrey was worried that she might lose control while taking the potion. It had absolutely nothing to do with what Lewis said about certain secret techniques being able to keep one's appearance youthful. Absolutely not. After Audrey made up her mind to refine chakra, Lewis told her to start refining it right now. With him present, even if there really was some problem, he could speak up to stop it. Audrey did not refuse this, but began refining in front of Lewis. With the previous successful experience, there was no failure this time either. Inside the space, Lewis understood that she had succeeded after feeling an additional trace of chakra suddenly appear outside the space. He immediately stopped speaking further, and instead concentrated his mind, controlling the space to move toward the coordinate position. On Audrey's side, after feeling the chakra in her body again, she was not as wary as before, but instead let go, and allowed it to circulate through her body. It wasn't until half an hour later, when this trace of chakra was completely consumed by her, that this cultivation session came to an end. Although she had decided on her future path, Audrey did not give up on the potion formula she had exchanged for with the ghost shark blood. She sat back at her dressing table and, around the page where the potion formula was recorded, she wrote down the names of various chemical substances, disguising it as a study comparison of her own. Of course, Audrey did not forget to leave a small mark in it, to avoid having the thought, "What on earth did I write before?" when she looked at it again in the future. Chapter 5, The Spectator Potion for K. Don't be impatient. What you need to do now is, first, become proficient in the process of extracting chakra, and second, familiarize yourself with how to use it. Once you are proficient in both, you can start trying to use chakra while simultaneously extracting it. When you can achieve this step, it means you have initially entered the threshold and possess the ability to use chakra to fight others. Before that, you don't need to think about those ninjutsu and secret techniques. Not to mention whether you can learn them, you don't even have the most basic qualifications to use them. Since Audrey decided to follow the chakra system, she would set aside time every day to cultivate in front of Lewis. As for Lewis, besides controlling the spatial movement every day, he had nothing else to do. Thus, he didn't refuse, instead, he treated this teaching process as his own rest. In the process of moving the space, Lewis's control over this area of space also gradually deepened. This made him realize that the void he was currently in was very strange. It seemed not to exist naturally, but was deliberately designed by someone. The purpose seemed to be to isolate the inside from the outside, as if to prevent the existences within this void from getting out. Regarding this, Lewis had also suspected whether this void was actually a superlarge seal, with the purpose of sealing him. Of course, Lewis had self-awareness. He knew that even if he were to be sealed, it wouldn't be targeting him personally, but rather the Otsutsuki god within him. After all, strictly speaking, the Otsutsuki god was no different from an extraterrestrial demon to this world, so it was understandable for it to be sealed. Although Lewis understood this, when it actually fell upon his own head, he was unwilling to accept it. After all, according to his own feelings, it would take nearly 1,000 years for Otsutsuki Shirbai within him to be completely unsealed. He couldn't possibly exile himself in the void for 1,000 years for the sake of this world. Perhaps when his own time was nearing its end, he might seal himself somewhere for the safety of the world, to prevent the existence within him from destroying it. But that absolutely didn't mean he was willing to sacrifice his entire life, especially since this life was exceptionally long for him. As for Audrey, besides refining chakra, she hadn't actually given up on studying the spectator potion. After all, it was the first complete potion formula she had obtained. Even if she didn't plan to consume it herself, she could still take it out and give it to other companions. After all, her little friends were quite looking forward to the extraordinary. Audrey informed her family that she had recently become interested in chemistry, and wanted to try conducting some experiments. So, Earl Hall waved his hand and selected an empty room in the house, having a complete set of chemical instruments set up inside. He also signaled Audrey to see if anything was missing. If so, she should say so, and let the butler purchase it. Since concocting the spectator potion didn't actually require any complex chemical instruments, Audrey only had the butler buy more test tubes, flasks, and Erlenmeyer flasks. Let's see, the main ingredients are a pair of adult manhal fish eyes, and 35 milliliters of horned black fish blood. I don't have the eyes, but I do have the horned black fish blood. Pure water, autumn crocus essence, cow teeth peonia powder. It seems that among the supplementary ingredients, only the elf flower is missing. Great, now I only need to find the eyes of an adult manhal fish, and elf flower petals to concoct the potion. I don't know about the manhal fish for now, but I seem to have heard someone mention the elf flower before. Audrey held a list, searching through the family treasury, and ticking off each item she found. Oh, I remember now. I think I heard Glaylant mention it before. Looks like I'll have to find him later. Viscount Glayant, as Audrey's fellow occult enthusiast, had quite a collection of various rare materials. After finding him, Audrey even saw a whole adult manhal fish in his collection room. Thus, Audrey easily gathered all the ingredients for this spectator potion. However, during this process, Viscount Glayant also noticed something unusual and suspected whether Audrey had secretly obtained some occult knowledge behind their little group's back. Audrey didn't directly admit to it, but she didn't explicitly deny it either, instead giving a hint with ambiguous words. Audrey had her own considerations for this. First, she planned to experiment and see what the spectator potion was actually like. Second, she wanted to ask Lewis if he would allow her to share the matter of chakra with others. The former required Audrey's own efforts, while for the latter, Lewis himself was actually somewhat hesitant. Lewis was still not quite sure if this void outside the space was truly a seal set up specifically for him. If it were true, it would mean that in this world, there was a powerhouse or a group of powerhouses who knew of his existence. In such a case, he couldn't be certain how much that powerhouse knew about him, or rather, about the Otsutsuki. If the other party had some understanding, then wouldn't his widespread promotion of chakra be equivalent to exposing his existence to the outside world? When that time came, what awaited him might very well be one or more powerhouses descending from the sky to seal him once again. As for the possibility that this was all a misunderstanding, then it wouldn't matter, it would just be a waste of a few more of his brain cells. Therefore, out of safety considerations, Lewis's explanation to Audrey was that she must first reach the threshold of chakra cultivation before she could promote it privately within a very small circle. Audrey had no objections to this. In fact, she didn't plan to directly go public with her acquisition of extraordinary power either. If nothing else, in their aristocratic circle, only some secret information related to the extraordinary was circulated in the shadows. It was clear that in the overall social consensus, it was not believed that such things should be made public. As such, one naturally couldn't be too careful. As for why she would still ask Lewis if he allowed her to spread it in a small circle under these circumstances, it was out of consideration for her own interests. She had also grown up receiving an aristocratic education, and naturally understood the importance of friends and allies. To keep friends and allies by one's side, the best way was to give them benefits they couldn't refuse. And among all benefits, extraordinary power was undoubtedly at the very top. If Lewis allowed her to spread it, she would essentially have a group of allies with closely tied interests. Lewis was not averse to this, in fact, he was glad to see it happen. With the Otsutsuki clan's control over chakra, the more Audrey and the others cultivated chakra, the more impossible it would actually be for them to defy him. It was only because he worried about the possible existence of that unknown powerhouse, otherwise, Lewis would have wished for the whole world to cultivate chakra. By then, everyone facing him would naturally be 30% weaker, and the whole world would become his back garden. Even though Lewis didn't have the idea of becoming a god or an ancestor in this world, anyone would hope to live in a safe environment. In his past life, his safety relied on the country he was in. But now, without an existence providing a safety net above him, everything could only rely on the individual. Naturally, the stronger he was and the weaker others were, the better. Lewis's answer could be said to have made Audrey very happy, especially since from the various occult knowledge she currently understood, obtaining extraordinary power required paying a corresponding price, and losing control of the extraordinary was one such price. As such, the safe extraordinary power system of refining chakra appeared to be precious. Especially in their aristocratic circles, she didn't yet understand why those high-ranking nobles would allow a power like the extraordinary to slip out of their control. But thinking about it, there was a high probability that it was because such behavior was very dangerous. For those nobles, there was absolutely no need to gamble their lives for an extraordinary power that wouldn't significantly enhance their authority. However, just like Audrey, Viscount Glaint, and the others, the curiosity and longing for this mysterious power always existed. If there were an opportunity to obtain the extraordinary without any danger, presumably none of these nobles would refuse. So now, Audrey needed to know exactly how dangerous taking a potion was. At this moment, Audrey felt conflicted. Her innate kindness made her hope that taking the potion wasn't dangerous. Yet, the aristocratic education provided by her family made her hope that taking the potion would be as dangerous as possible. To keep these two thoughts from tormenting her, Audrey decided to start the experiment immediately after gathering the materials to directly observe the potion's effects. Audrey instructed her personal maid that she would be conducting a chemical experiment next, and thus could not be disturbed, to avoid the chemical reagents being used incorrectly. Annie naturally wouldn't refuse her young lady's command and immediately stated that she would caution the others. Even so, Audrey was still not quite at ease. She also brought over her big dog, Susie, letting it guard outside the laboratory door, and instructing it to tell her if anyone approached. After finishing all this, Audrey finally locked herself in the laboratory and bolted the door. The concoction of the potion was not cumbersome, it could even be said to be quite simple. No heating or grinding was needed, one only had to strictly control the order in which the potion ingredients were added to the flask. After dropping the pair of adult manhal fish eyes into the horned black fish blood, the eyes rapidly bobbed up and down. And during this process, a large number of bubbles were released, and the entire liquid seemed as if it had been brought to a boil. Facing this situation, Audrey quickly dropped the other supplementary materials into the flask. Curiously, those supplementary materials dissolved rapidly in the boiling blood, disappearing in just 2 or 3 breaths. It was also at this time that the boiling effect of the blood in the flask disappeared, replaced by a series of fine but gentle bubbles. Previously, the blood reaction had been so intense, yet no change was seen in the manhal fish eyes. But now they were gradually breaking apart and dissolving. That pair of eyes grew smaller and smaller, with more and more debris falling off, finally turning completely into powder. But it only turned into powder, it never dissolved any further. This caused the liquid in the flask to change from its original blood red to silver white. Looking closely, one could see that the silver white color was actually made up of tiny bits of debris. The final product is silver white. It seems I really am talented to have succeeded on the first try. I was worried before that only having 2 sets of materials might not be enough. After all, to make those little friends believe me, it's best to bring a finished product directly. Woof, woof, woof. Just then, Susie, who was guarding outside the laboratory door, suddenly started barking. According to Audrey's previous instructions, this meant someone was coming. Audrey couldn't help but frown. She had specifically instructed earlier not to let anyone disturb her at this time. Moreover, the location of this laboratory was in a corner of the villa. If someone didn't look for it deliberately, people usually wouldn't walk this way. Audrey took another look at the silver-white liquid still churning in the flask, hid it in a dark corner of the room, and then opened the laboratory door. Audrey crouched down and looked at the big dog wagging its tail. Susie, is someone coming? Susie leaned forward with a pleasing look, but because Audrey had just concocted the potion and her hands had touched the materials, she didn't pet Susie out of safety considerations. Just then, Audrey's personal maid appeared at the end of the corridor's corner. Didn't I say not to disturb me while I'm doing experiments? Annie stepped forward with an apologetic face and handed over an invitation with both hands. I know, miss, but there's an invitation from a duchess, Lady Della. Hearing this, a contemplative expression appeared on Audrey's face, and she stepped forward 2 steps to take the invitation. Is it the wife of that Duke of Negan? Annie briefly summarized the contents of the invitation. Yes, she has invited the court baker, Madame Vivi, so she wants to invite the Countess and you to taste afternoon tea. Audrey blinked. She was currently in the heat of her interest in mysterious powers, and was completely uninterested in these pointless social activities. Tell my mother that I have a headache, perhaps stimulated by the smell of chemical reagents during the experiment earlier. You could also say the sunlight is too strong, and I'm a bit dehydrated. In short, please apologize to Lady Della on my behalf." While speaking, Audrey simultaneously put on a weak expression. Annie wasn't stupid and naturally knew Audrey was faking, so she still wanted to try harder. "Miss, but this isn't just afternoon tea, it's also a literary salon." But Audrey, already immersed in occult matters, was completely uninterested in these things. "Even if it's a literary salon, it can't cure my headache. Annie, I think I need to rest." Seeing that Audrey was determined not to participate, Annie sighed helplessly. "All right, Mississippi. Then do you need me to help you back to your room?" Just then, Audrey's ears twitched slightly. She felt as if she had heard some sound. "No need, my experiment from just now isn't finished yet. I still need to process it a bit more." Chapter 6, Susie, 4K. In order to prevent Annie from noticing anything unusual, Audrey even stood at the laboratory door and watched her leave before turning back into the lab. But just as she turned around, she suddenly noticed one thing: Susie, who had been squatting at the door, had disappeared. Not only that, the laboratory door she had previously closed was now slightly ajar, clearly having been opened earlier. Hearing the rustling sound coming from the laboratory, Audrey's expression changed. "Oh no, how could I forget that Susie knows how to open doors with handles? What is that sound?" Audrey could no longer care about noble elegance and ran into the laboratory in 3 steps. In her line of sight was a shattered cup on the floor, and the large golden retriever, Susie, was licking up the last drop of silver-white liquid. Audrey stood dumbfounded at the door, like a statue. As for the culprit, Susie, she sat there obediently as soon as Audrey entered, wagging her tail with a smile, looking at her master with innocent and pure eyes. After accepting the situation, Audrey wasn't so concerned about the loss of the potion, but quickly came to Susie. "Quick, open your mouth. You didn't swallow the glass too, did you?" She simply pieced together the shards of the conical flask on the floor, and finding that nothing seemed to be missing, breathed a sigh of relief. But then, Audrey reacted again. "Wait, Susie, you don't know how to meditate. Are there any abnormalities after you drank the potion? Do you feel uncomfortable or unwell anywhere?" Unfortunately, Susie couldn't speak and couldn't understand overly complex information. She just took advantage of Audrey squatting down to bury her head in the other's arms, leaving only a sturdy back and a thick tail wagging there. Audrey pried Susie's dog head, looking left and right, and found that she was no different than before, which finally put her mind at ease. But then, she felt something was wrong. You should know that when the hanged man spoke to her, he had given her many warnings. Not only did he tell her to be careful that the order of the potion configuration could not be wrong, but the amount of materials should also be less rather than more, as that could easily lead to losing control. In addition, he emphasized that after taking the potion, she must meditate immediately to control the overflowing spirituality and power, saying that only in this way could the danger of losing control be avoided to the greatest extent. But now it seemed that her big dog neither knew how to meditate, and her weight was much lighter than a human's. According to her previous experience with medicine, the dosage should obviously have been reduced. But looking at Susie, there was clearly no problem, which couldn't help but make Audrey suspect if they were lying to her. Finally, after briefly cleaning up the shards, Audrey took the remaining potion materials and left the laboratory with Susie. Out of concern for Susie and a thirst for beyonder knowledge, she returned directly to her room and took out the bronze mirror. "Six paths. 6 paths, are you there?" Following Audrey's call, Louis stepped out from behind the giant tree and came to the window in surprise. After this period of contact, Louis had already indicated to her that he had learned Loanese, so the two no longer needed to communicate through the mind. "What's wrong? Today's cultivation time shouldn't be here yet, right?" After Louis appeared, although Audrey was anxious, she did not forget her etiquette. She slightly lifted her skirt with both hands, spreading it to both sides, bent her knees slightly, and bowed her head with a smile. Louis smiled and nodded in return. He personally felt very unaccustomed to this and also found it very troublesome. Even though he had said there was no need for so much etiquette, the young girl across from him would bow every time they met. Out of politeness, Louis could only follow suit and return the gesture. All right, Miss Audrey, please speak plainly. Is there something you need from me at this time? At this point, Audrey felt a bit embarrassed, but she still pushed Susie, who was hiding behind her, to the front. It's like this. I previously obtained a potion formula from someone at a gathering of that hidden existence. Out of curiosity, I brewed a portion, but it was accidentally drunk by Susie. Although she isn't showing any abnormalities now, I'm still worried she might lose control. Louis thought for a moment, feeling that this matter could be large or small. After all, the chakra in his body belonged to the kind of power with very strong reactivity. Not only humans and aliens could use it, but also various insects, animals, and even plants in nature could use it. The problem now was that he didn't know enough about the potion system, and didn't know how universal it was. Thinking of this, he felt that this might be a good opportunity to understand the potion system, so he signaled the other to press Susie's paw against the mirror surface. Then Louis followed suit, invading the other's body with his chakra through the window, preparing to connect with her spirit. Susie herself was very resistant to this, but after Audrey hugged her from behind, she no longer struggled, but opened her big eyes and looked at Louis in the window with curiosity. This time, because Louis was connecting his mind with a dog, he was no longer as restrained as before, only reading those scattered thoughts that radiated out. This time, Louis truly used his ability, completely invading the other's heart and reading all of her thoughts. At this moment, Louis noticed a slight change in his vision. First, he found that his vision became sharper, and his observation of the world became more acute. The most important thing was that his mind could spontaneously summarize the external environment. It was as if someone were summarizing keywords for everything he saw, and then a narration would read them in a voice only he could hear. For example, now, the young girl across from him, although calm on the surface, had her eyes fixed on Susie the whole time. Her arms holding the other were very tight, but her palms were stroking the fur on the other's side and belly one stroke at a time. This showed that the young girl before him was far from being as calm as she appeared. Her heart was full of tension and worry, as well as a faint sense of confusion. Even not just the girl, but even the big dog on the opposite side, he could actually see several kinds of expressions. When he first made this discovery, Louis thought he had seen it wrong, but combined with the thoughts he detected, he found that the other was actually actively making expressions. Louis immediately became interested. Hello, Susie. Hello, sir. Can you ask Audrey to let go of her arms? I can't really breathe from her hug. Louis blinked, of course, but before that, I'm going to ask you first, do you feel uncomfortable anywhere? Of course, I mean besides Audrey holding you too tightly. Nothing is uncomfortable, but I'm a bit sleepy now and want to go to sleep. Louis chatted with the other for a few more sentences, during which he never stopped exploring her thoughts. It wasn't until he felt it was enough that he disconnected the chakra link between them. At the same time, the special perspective from before disappeared, and he saw the world return to its previous appearance. Don't worry, there's nothing wrong with your Susie. Oh, I can't say that either. Under the effect of the potion, her intelligence has been further developed. It's hard to say what the future will be like, but for now, it's definitely not lower than a 15 or 16-year-old youth. In addition, during my investigation, I found that her spiritual power has been increased a lot by the potion, far exceeding yours. In this regard, I hope you can work harder in your subsequent cultivation. You shouldn't really be inferior to your own pet. After hearing Louis say that Susie was fine, Audrey truly breathed a long sigh of relief. But Louis's subsequent words made Audrey's chest feel a bit stifled. Just as she didn't know how to reply to Louis, she suddenly felt a burst of moist heat on her cheek. It was Susie, who had noticed Audrey's complex mood and stuck out her tongue to lick her face. Audrey felt comforted by Susie and asked Louis in detail about what changes Susie had. In other words, Susie now completely understands what I'm saying and what I want to express. That's right. Didn't you say before that the person who gave you the potion formula told you that you could strengthen the development of spirituality and power through meditation later? Now you can teach Susie how to meditate, she will need it too. Although her spiritual power has increased, it is still very weak, and won't be of much use. As it further strengthens, some interesting abilities might appear. After Lewis finished speaking, he left the window. He also had to properly digest the information he had just obtained from Susie's mind. Lewis had previously fully invaded the other's spirit, so he discovered that after she took the potion, she actually obtained a lot of beyonder knowledge out of thin air. This made Lewis very surprised. After all, he already knew the formula for the spectator potion, and he also had an understanding of the corresponding materials through Audrey. However, none of these materials possessed any ability to store beyonder knowledge. So the question is, where did this beyonder knowledge that appeared out of thin air come from? Lewis felt that this might be very important information. He planned to understand it properly, as it might lead to a better understanding of the beyonders of this world. As for asking Audrey, unfortunately, she had no clue about it at all. After confirming that the spectator potion was truly effective, even though Audrey herself didn't take this path, she understood its value. This would be a hidden channel for obtaining beyonder knowledge that she possessed. As for Lewis, he was another channel. Since she had confirmed that the potion system was truly effective, Audrey decided to find a way to collect the Roselle's diary that Mr. Fool wanted. Because in Audrey's heart, she had already labeled both Lewis and Mr. Fool as hidden ancient beings. So when she collected a page of Roselle's diary with both sides covered in unknown characters, she didn't forget to ask Lewis if he wanted to see it. Lewis originally didn't care much, thinking that he only knew Loanese now, which he had learned from the young girl before him. Therefore, characters they couldn't understand for so many years, he certainly wouldn't be able to understand either. But since the other had kindly notified him, he naturally had to take a look. Don't have too many expectations. During my time, I hadn't heard of any Roselle Gustave, so there's a high probability. However, before Lewis could finish his sentence, he saw the square characters on the paper across from him. It had to be said, these characters were terribly ugly, none of them looked like they were handwritten, but rather drawn with strokes. May 21st, the Church of the God of Craftsmanship gave me two choices, the start of two sequence pathways. One is Savant, which belongs to the complete sequence chain they possess. The other is Mystery Prior, obtained from the Moses ascetic order, which lacks higher sequences. May 22nd, my choice was simple, Savant. A savant with a complete sequence. Although mastering more mysticism knowledge would help me find a way home, the problem is that without being strong enough, something like transmigration must rely on external forces. Whether those forces are good or bad, kind or malicious, is uncontrollable and very dangerous. In that case, it's better to make myself strong and rely on my own power to go back. Therefore, a complete sequence is my primary consideration. Lewis's mouth hung open in shock, and he signaled Audrey to flip the diary in her hand to the back. From Lewis's reaction, Audrey knew she had guessed correctly. 6 paths before her, clearly like Mr. Fool, could understand this kind of character. May 23rd, I became a savant. With the power of the potion, I actually recalled all the knowledge I had learned before physics, chemistry, and so on. Not only did I recall them, but I also deeply understood and mastered them. Haha, this is simply a class tailor-made for me, a visitor from another world, it can maximize my advantages. I must say, if I went back in this state to my senior year of high school, I would definitely become the top scholar. If I had more standardized and in-depth professional study, becoming a scientist wouldn't be too difficult a goal. May 26th, I really enjoy this identity of savant. A strange thing happened, when I considered myself a savant, and did things that matched its role, those whispers that almost drove me crazy quieted down quite a bit. My occasional temper outbursts were also controlled, and I remembered this diary thing. Is this the acting that the mysterious Mr. Zeradel mentioned to me? This might be the key to resolving the potion's hidden dangers. After reading these 2 pages of text, Lewis's heart could not be calm for a long time. He had originally thought he was a lonely transmigrator, but he hadn't expected that there would be a transmigrator senior before him. How could this not make him excited? Chapter 7, Roselle Gustave, 4K. Lewis blinked, calming his excited heart as he absorbed the content he had just read from the diary. Tell me about this Roselle. I want to learn more about him. Audrey wasn't surprised by this and immediately shared all the information she knew. He invented the practical steam engine, improved sailboats and cannons, formulated and promulgated the new civil code, discovered safe sea routes in the Berserk Sea, initiated the era of colonization in the southern continent, invented tarot cards and tarot divination, invented various ways to play cards, invented the loom, invented newspapers, improved papermaking and printing techniques, and wrote and published classic novels like Romeo and Juliet. It is said that in his later years, he saw the blasphemy slate, and created mysterious cards that contain the 22 pathways of the divine, and so on. At this point, I hope readers remember our domain name. Reading good books on Taiwan is very convenient. Lewis's expression changed as he listened. He thought to himself, good grief, isn't this transmigrator a bit too unethical? He touched on every single aspect, leaving almost no room for those who came after him. Combining this with the diary entry he had seen earlier, Lewis knew this was all the effect of the savant potion. Although Lewis hadn't experienced it himself, from the diary's description, it seemed to act on personal memory, allowing the person to recall all knowledge from before their transmigration. Otherwise, even if an ordinary person could make some inventions, they certainly wouldn't be able to directly reproduce those classic novels. After all, who would memorize entire novels for no reason? After all, the novels Roselle reproduced weren't just ones like Romeo and Juliet, that could be adapted into plays. Otherwise, one might wonder if he had been a stage actor before transmigrating. 6 Paths, may I ask if you truly recognize this special script? Facing Audrey's inquiry, Lewis didn't answer immediately but thought of something else. You said earlier that it was an existence called the Fool, who asked you to collect these diaries of Roselle. Then, did he show any sign of recognizing this script? No, but Mr. Fool said he was willing to exchange some mysticism knowledge for them, so I think it's possible. A sharp light flashed in Lewis's eyes. Indeed, I do recognize this script. It is a language that shouldn't exist in this world. This is good. When you go back to the gathering, you can quietly observe and see if he recognizes this script. If that Mr. Fool recognizes it, then I might actually know him. Audrey clearly hadn't expected Lewis to say this, but then her heart grew excited again. Lewis looked at Audrey and met her gaze, which was shining with curiosity. Well, how about this? Like that fool, you collect these Roselle diaries for me as well. In exchange, I can tell you the content recorded within them. Then thank you very much, Mr. Six Paths. Lewis shook his head. In these 2 pages of the diary, not much is recorded. It mainly says that the Church of the God of Craftsmanship has 2 potion sequences under its command. One is the Savant, which belongs to the complete sequence chain held by the Church itself. The other is the Mystery Prior, which is said to have been obtained from an organization called the Moses Ascetic Order, but they only have the low sequence formulas and lack the higher sequences. And the Savant sequence has the ability to grant photographic memory, and the ability to recall past experiences. Oh, the notes also mentioned that when Roselle regarded himself as a savant, and did things consistent with that role, the maddening whispers in his ears quieted down a lot, and his temper was brought under control. It also said a mysterious Mr. Zeradal mentioned acting to him, saying it might be the key to resolving the hidden dangers of the potions. Hearing Lewis mention acting, Audrey immediately recalled the previous banquet, and the information Mr. Fool had used to exchange for the diaries. Fool also mentioned that. He said it's not about mastering but digesting, not about excavating but acting. The name of the potion is not just a symbol but an image, and even more so, the key to digestion. Lewis raised an eyebrow but didn't pay much attention. After all, his understanding of the mysticism of this world was too shallow, and he didn't know what level such knowledge was. Audrey thought for a moment and finally asked, Mr. 6 paths, you just mentioned the Moses ascetic order. What kind of organization is that? Lewis shook his head. I don't know. As I said, when I was active, there was no Roselle yet, so you'll have to explore what this Moses ascetic order is for yourself. Regarding the fact that Lewis only informed her of the diary's content, instead of teaching her the specific meaning of that Chinese, Audrey was also sensible enough not to speak further. After all, in her view, this was a mysterious script that even gods were said to be unable to decipher. It was clearly top-tier mysticism knowledge, and its value must be immeasurable. At the same time, Audrey became far more dedicated to collecting Roselle's diaries than before. After all, she now had the chance to obtain hidden mysticism knowledge from them, which gave it a completely different meaning. It was also at this moment that Audrey was thinking about how to further bind herself to Lewis. So she took the initiative to speak about what she had seen and heard at Mr. Fool's banquet. The reason for this, besides the fact that Audrey had never heard of the chakra system she was currently practicing anywhere else but from Lewis. A significant part of it also stemmed from Audrey's own unease. Although Audrey initially felt honored to participate in a private gathering hosted by an ancient and hidden existence like the Fool. After that initial excitement passed, it was followed by a deep sense of fear and unease. After all, unlike the communication between her and Lewis, which still had a window in between. Every time Mr. Fool pulled her spirit body away, it was in a way that made one unable to resist. This feeling of placing one's life entirely in the hands of others is something no one would feel comfortable with. But the problem was, she had no way to resist Mr. Fool's actions. Not just her, but that Mr. Hangman, who was clearly quite capable, obviously had no power to resist either. Comparatively, Lewis, a hidden existence who was visible, tangible, and had a very easygoing personality, seemed much safer and more reliable. Furthermore, for the current Audrey, it was clear that Lewis could bring her greater benefits, which made it easy for her to make a move that favored Lewis. As Audrey spoke, combined with the images Lewis had seen from her scattered thoughts earlier, Lewis gained a further understanding of that Mr. At the same time, Lewis also became interested in the gathering named after tarot cards that the Fool had established. To be precise, he was interested in that Hangman. After all, through their contact during this time, Lewis had roughly understood the status of Audrey's family in the Kingdom of Lone, yet even such a family had no supernatural inheritance. But that Hangman spoke about it so casually, even mentioning 2 different sequences right away. One should know that according to Roselle's diary, even a church with an orthodox god only has 2 pathways. Plus, the other party possessed the sailor potion formula, which sounded related to the Church of the Lord of Storms. Lewis strongly suspected he might be someone from that church. He didn't know the specific situation of the Fool, but he probably wasn't easy to deal with. However, that Hangman should be easier to target. Especially since he heard Audrey say that the other party also spoke Loanese. With Audrey's family background, if they really put in the effort, they should be able to find him. It wasn't until Lewis heard Audrey say that in last week's gathering, Mr. Fool had her experiment with an ability. In his Grey Fog Palace, in order to allow Audrey and the others to give him the Roselle diaries they couldn't understand. The Fool had them directly manifest the text from their minds onto paper within that palace. In Lewis's view, either the palace they were in had the ability to read thoughts, or the Fool himself had that ability. If that were the case, wouldn't he be at risk of exposure? Fortunately, Lewis wasn't completely without options. One was to cast an illusion, another was to apply a seal, and another was to directly modify memories. The only problem was that across that window, many of Lewis's methods couldn't be used. Fortunately, in the past 2 weeks or so, Lewis had been controlling spatial movement day and night without stopping. Now he could clearly feel that he was about to. Like a finger popping a soap bubble, Lewis felt the space he was in suddenly burst out from the original void. And as soon as he rushed out of that void, he felt as if he had entered an ocean of information. Although it was still chaotic and disordered here, it was no longer a void, instead, it was filled with various brilliant spots of light. For example, right now, many spots of light were hitting his space at every moment. Through his control over this space, Lewis knew that those spots of light were actually streams of knowledge and information. Could this be the boundless sea of learning? At this very moment, Lewis sensed two pieces of information simultaneously. One was that chakra, and the other was the coordinates of where the window was located. In Audrey's eyes, Lewis, who had been listening to her narration, suddenly froze for a moment. But in the next moment, Audrey's eyes widened because Lewis appeared right in front of her. Yes, it was no longer communication across that window, but he was standing right there in her room, on the floor just 2 meters in front of her. Looking at the dumbfounded young girl before him, Lewis smiled and nodded to her. "Hello, beautiful Miss Audrey." Lewis's voice woke the young girl. She jumped up from her chair and quickly curtsied to him. "Oh, hello, respected Mr. Six Paths. Welcome to the Hall family." The smile on Lewis's face remained. "I heard what you said earlier, and I suspect that Mr. Fool also has the ability to read thoughts and memories." When Audrey communicated with Lewis through the window before, she could only see the part above his neck, or at most down to his chest. Now that Lewis was standing right in front of her, she noticed just how large the difference was between their clothing styles. It couldn't be helped. When Lewis transmigrated, he was just going downstairs to walk the dog, so he hadn't paid much attention to his clothes. He wore a white crewneck short-sleeved shirt, covered by a loose cashmere lapel jacket, beige casual pants, and a pair of white sneakers on his feet. In Audrey's eyes, this outfit wasn't ugly, but it was quite informal, the kind of clothes that definitely shouldn't be worn when visiting another noble's home. But soon, Audrey dismissed these thoughts from her mind. Oh, Audrey, what are you thinking? Six Paths is an ancient existence from who knows what era. The customs of that time must be different from now. Maybe this was the formal wear of that era. How could you think such a rude thing? Six Paths, I actually have suspicions about that as well, but they are only suspicions. Did you come over this time because you have a solution? In a face-to-face situation, Lewis found that even without using a chakra connection, he could detect what the young girl in front of him was thinking. He could only awkwardly purse his lips, pretending he hadn't heard her inner thoughts. Ahem, that's right. I have 3 solutions. You can listen to them and see which one you're willing to use. Then thank you so much. The first is for me to place a mental imprint on you. This imprint can detect if your consciousness is being peeked at by others, and it will provide a warning and a counterattack when it happens. The second is to place a seal in your memory to hide those memories that aren't suitable for disclosure. Even if the other party truly invades your thoughts, they won't easily discover them. The third is to directly remove specific memories from your mind and retrieve them when you need them. These 3 methods each have their pros and cons. The first is the most direct. As long as the other party invades your consciousness, they will be exposed, but it will also let them know you are hiding something. The second protects the sealed memories to a certain extent, but you yourself won't know if the other party has probed your thoughts. Moreover, if the other party specializes in thought acquisition, they might find loopholes in your memory and follow the clues to find the hidden memories. As for the third, it's the most effective, since those memories are no longer in your mind, so the other party naturally has no way of finding them. But correspondingly, if you don't retrieve them, they are truly lost. Alright, now it's up to you. Which one do you want to use? Chapter 8, Backland, 4K. Audrey truly did not want to accept any of the 3 options Lewis had proposed. The latter 2 options were out of the question. Memory is such a private thing. Who would be willing to let it be manipulated by others? Even the first option required Lewis to leave an imprint in her psyche, which was essentially leaving a backdoor in her mind. Remember this site's domain name, Taiwan Novel Network, is super thoughtful and convenient. Lewis knew what Audrey was thinking and felt helpless about it. Besides those, there are other ways, but the problem is that you've only just started refining chakra and haven't begun learning ninjutsu yet. Otherwise, once your mental strength improves and your genjutsu resistance grows, you could do these things yourself. Audrey's interest was immediately piqued. Sage of Six Paths, can I also learn these ninjutsu and genjutsu you mentioned? Lewis nodded casually. Of course. Setting aside the latter two options, once you've learned genjutsu, you can implement the first option yourself. At that time, you can even choose to place different types of genjutsu on yourself. A very simple one that breaks as soon as it's touched by any external mental power would be perfectly suited as an outermost early warning mechanism. Inside that, you can set up a more powerful genjutsu. If an opponent wants to invade your mind, they must first destroy this layer of genjutsu, which in turn acts as a form of protection. Audrey's eyes lit up as she listened, but she soon became dejected. There was no way around it, she couldn't do it right now. Ultimately, Audrey made up her mind and asked Lewis to perform a sealing jutsu on her. Compared to having her memories tampered with, she felt she would rather have a mental imprint left behind. After all, for believers like them, they had essentially been imprinted by the gods long ago. In Audrey's view, even if the Lewis before her wasn't a god, he was a terrifyingly powerful existence, so being imprinted by him was not unreasonable. After she made her choice, Lewis's eyes instantly changed from their original black and white to a blood-red color. Before Audrey could clearly see what Lewis's eyes looked like, her own eyes lost their focus. Simultaneously, the two of them appeared in a vast, white space. Before the young girl could react, Lewis spoke first. This is your mental space. Of course, such a space doesn't actually exist, it's just a visualized manifestation. Now, I will leave two genjutsu here for you. As he finished speaking, Audrey found a necklace had appeared around her neck. This is the first one, a genjutsu for detection. If any external mental power probes in, this necklace will immediately shatter and disappear, and you will know. Next, Audrey discovered that the light green gown she was wearing had transformed into a magnificent court dress. The style was similar to a blowout robe full-body garment with a tight-fitting bodice and an inner lining, predominantly bright red with ornate white lace sleeves. This is the mental defense barrier I've left for you. If the opponent is only reading the surface consciousness you actively broadcast, it won't be affected at all, and even the outermost warning won't be triggered. Even if they shallowly probe your thoughts at the time rather than further exploring your memories, it won't actually collide with this defense. Only when the opponent actively explores your memories will they collide with this final genjutsu. Of course, this is only a trace of power I've left behind, so I cannot guarantee the opponent absolutely cannot break through, but at the very least, it can provide a certain degree of resistance. Audrey was already very satisfied with this, and did a twirl in her magnificent gown. Then, she pulled her skirt out to both sides with her hands, bent her knees while stepping 1 foot back, and lowered her body by about a head's height in a formal curtsy. Respected Mr. Sage of Six Paths, thank you very much for your help. Lewis remained unaccustomed to her set of etiquette and the elaborate attire. In his view, these things were a form of conditioning. Only those who adhered to this complex etiquette and embraced such elaborate dress could be absorbed into the existing circles of power. It wasn't that conditioning was necessarily wrong, but Lewis believed that the premise of conditioning should not go against human nature. When a set of so-called etiquette became so complex that ordinary people couldn't remember it, or a set of clothing became impossible to put on without help, it became dross in Lewis's eyes. However, Lewis personally adhered to the principles of none of your business and none of my business. As long as this anti-human conditioning didn't fall upon his own head, he wouldn't interfere. For instance, right now, out of respect for her culture, the defensive genjutsu Lewis had arranged for Audrey took the form of attire that fit her culture. Having finished, Lewis disconnected the mental link, and both of them exited the mental space simultaneously. Lewis's eyes also returned to their original appearance. Because it was only a fleeting glimpse, Audrey even wondered if she had misseen earlier. In reality, Lewis had used the Rinnegan. Indeed, to set up that final genjutsu defense for Audrey, he had directly borrowed power from Otsutsuki Shirbai. The previous warning genjutsu cost almost nothing, but this defensive genjutsu had cost Lewis at least 1 month of his lifespan. Despite what Lewis had said about it being just a trace of his power, and not knowing if it could resist the fool's probe, Lewis had actually put a lot of thought into it. It looked like a simple defense, but there were other measures hidden within. Once this defensive genjutsu was broken, to avoid exposing his own information, Lewis had added a contingency that would instantly clear all of Audrey's memories related to himself. And beneath that, Lewis had actually hidden an even more core defensive genjutsu. The memories Audrey had cleared were actually backed up here. This way, Lewis could choose whether or not to restore her memories depending on the situation. This core genjutsu was hidden in the deepest part of Audrey's memory, and could only be discovered if someone searched every inch of her memories. If even this core genjutsu was broken, then Lewis could only say sorry to Audrey. Because hidden beneath it was, in fact, a mental bomb. It would detonate instantly, completely obliterating Audrey's psyche in the first moment to prevent anyone from finding him through any clues. With any luck, when the mental bomb exploded, it might even kill the intruder as well. Of course, Lewis was kind-hearted, so to keep the girl from worrying, he didn't tell her. Having finished this, Lewis was much more at ease, as the possibility of his exposure had significantly decreased. Not only that, Lewis also picked up the copper mirror from Audrey's dressing table. Now that he was here in person, this window had become redundant. In fact, it had gone from being useless to becoming a trail that could potentially be used to track Lewis. However, he didn't destroy the copper mirror directly. Instead, he planned to keep it with him and study why it could connect to his space when he had the time. Lewis extended his right hand, and the space in front of him began to warp spontaneously, revealing a wormhole that led to his divine tree space. After placing the copper mirror inside the space, Lewis also casually broke off a tiny rootlet from the divine tree. Despite the divine tree in this space not being much to look at, it was essentially an existence capable of devouring world energy. Even if someone like Audrey were allowed to attack it at will, it would be difficult to harm the divine tree in the slightest. Yet in Lewis's hands, the rootlet was easily snapped off. Lewis twisted and coiled the rootlet, eventually weaving it into a wooden bracelet. In the next moment, Lewis's eyes changed again, and Audrey finally saw the patterns within them clearly. While Audrey was marveling at Lewis's eyes, she saw him hand the bracelet to her. "This bracelet is for you. As for that mirror, I'll be taking it with me. You can try inputting chakra into it. First, I've left a coordinate inside. As long as you trigger that coordinate, I'll know you're looking for me, and I'll open a spatial rift just like I did now. Second, this bracelet is made from the roots of the divine tree, and it can change shape at will under the influence of chakra." Following Lewis's instructions, Audrey first tried to communicate with the coordinate inside the bracelet, and learned how to contact him. Then, she watched as the bracelet transformed into a small dagger under the influence of chakra. There is no inherent limit to the size this bracelet can transform into. As long as you have enough chakra, you could even make it larger than the entire world. Furthermore, due to the materials used, its texture is extremely sturdy. You can keep it for self-defense. Audrey experimented with turning the bracelet into various forms: a dagger, a rapier, a scimitar, a ribbon, a vase, a fork, and so on. Finally, after changing it back into a bracelet, Audrey thanked Lewis once again. Lewis waved his hand, indicating it was nothing. "It's nothing. Why don't you tell me about this country and this city? I've been in a deep sleep, and now that I've awakened, I plan to go out and see. Please give me an introduction." "It would be my honor." Though she said so, Audrey was a bit stumped. She wasn't quite sure where to begin. She eventually decided to start with the situation of the entire world. Well, on the entire northern continent, there are 7 countries in total: the Lone Kingdom to the east, Faesak to the north, Fane Pot to the south, Intis to the west, and 3 small countries surrounding Fane Pot. These 3 small countries are Lenberg, Seeger, and Mason, and they are all single-faith nations that believe in the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. Other countries are all multi-faith nations. For example, our Lone Kingdom has cathedrals for 4 major churches: the Church of the Evernight Goddess, the Church of the Lord of Storms, the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery, and the Church of the Earth Mother. The other major nations are in similar situations. On the southern continent corresponding to our northern continent, there were originally the East and West Balam nations. Since Emperor Roselle discovered the route to the southern continent, it has become a colony for various countries. For instance, our lone kingdom has colonies in both East and West Balam. Lewis nodded, finding it sounded somewhat familiar, much like how Europe colonized Africa in his original world. The city we are in is the capital of the lone kingdom, and it has nicknames such as the capital of capitals and the land of hope. Geographically, it's located in the center of the kingdom, only a few dozen kilometers from the Sonia Sea to the south. The Tasik River cuts diagonally through the city, dividing it into 11 main districts: Empress Borough, West District, North District, Hillsdon District, Sherwood Borough, St. George District, South of the Bridge, East Borough, Backland Bridge District, Dock District, and Factory District. Lewis nodded. And what are these districts primarily divided by? Empress Borough on the west side of the city is where the top nobles and the wealthy reside. The environment is elegant, and it's filled with mansions. The West District is adjacent to Empress Borough, and is also a traditional wealthy area with good security and complete living facilities. Hillsdon District is the economic, commercial, and financial center of the lone kingdom. The Backland Stock Exchange, the headquarters of major banks, and railway companies are located here. The North District is the political and religious center of the kingdom. The kingdom's parliament and the St. Samuel Cathedral of the Church of the Evernight Goddess are both located here. St. George District is near the dock area in the western part of the city, with warehouses, factories, and worker residences. The St. Hireland Cathedral of the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery is located here. Sherwood Borough is where the middle class and ordinary civil servants live. The environment is relatively quiet, and the St. Wind Cathedral of the Church of the Lord of Storms is located here. Backland Bridge District is located on both sides of the Tasik River, and is a transportation hub connecting the east and west of the city, with mixed commercial and residential functions. South of the bridge is located south of the Backland Bridge District. It's similar to Sherwood Borough, a residential area for commoners, and the Harvest Cathedral of the Church of the Earth Mother is also situated there. As for the East Borough, it's the poorest and most chaotic worker and slum area in Backland, with many factories, a harsh environment, and extremely poor sanitary conditions. Lewis nodded as he listened, and at the same time, his eyes changed once again. This time, it wasn't the Rinnegan but the Byakugan. The moment he activated the Byakugan, the world in his eyes changed instantly, turning from color to black and white. Furthermore, his field of vision became a 360-degree view without any blind spots, allowing him to take in everything within a 10-kilometer radius. Chapter 9, King's Avenue, 4K. Audrey naturally noticed Lewis's frequently changing pupils, but she didn't say anything, instead guessing in her heart whether this was a transcendent ability belonging to chakra. On Lewis's side, he used the vision just provided by the Byakugan to take a general look at the various districts as Audrey explained. Although it was just a glimpse, Lewis confirmed that the waters of this world were indeed quite deep. There was some kind of mysterious power blocking the outside of those cathedrals, preventing him from seeing directly inside. But that wasn't all. The most interesting part was that he discovered several other places besides those cathedrals that actually had similar arrangements. This was interesting. Lewis looked at his own attire and thought about the situation he had seen on the streets earlier. He then formed the double sword seal with his hands pressing his thumbs against the nails of his ring, and little fingers to form sword fingers, with his left palm facing outward and his left index and middle fingers placed into his right palm. Transform. As a puff of white smoke rose, the clothes Lewis was originally wearing disappeared. In their place were a white shirt, a deep blue vest, a deep blue jacket, a dark brown double-breasted cashmere overcoat, deep blue fabric trousers, shiny pointed brown leather shoes, and a top hat on his head. Noticing Audrey's curious gaze, Lewis said with a smile, "This is the basic transformation technique in ninjutsu. Once you've mastered the basics of chakra refinement, you can start learning it. You should know that this transformation technique is quite miraculous. Besides being able to change your attire like I just did, you can even directly change your height, gender and appearance. Once you progress further, you can even directly change species, turning into other animals, or even objects like vases, tables, and the like. Wow, that's amazing. Thinking of this, Lewis raised an eyebrow. It's just as well. I might have forgotten to mention it before, but as you saw, I was forming hand seals when I used the transformation technique. The ninjutsu you'll learn later will be the same. Although this step can be omitted once you've reached a certain level of proficiency, I don't think you'll be able to do that in the short term. As such, I'll teach you these basic hand seal gestures. Practice them on your own when you have nothing else to do, lest you find yourself unable to form the seals properly when you actually start learning ninjutsu later. Thank you for your generosity. Also, seeing your current attire, I assume you're planning to take a look around Backland. Is there anything I can do for you? Lewis shook his head. That won't be necessary. I plan to wander around on my own. You don't need to worry about me. Just remember to let me know before the next Fool gathering begins. With that, Lewis took a step, preparing to leave, but then he stopped immediately and squeezed out a somewhat embarrassed smile. Audrey was a bit confused by Lewis's behavior. Is there something else, sir? Please just say the word, and I will do my best. Lewis's voice was a bit awkward. Hey, well, I've just woken up, and I don't know what currency you use now. Audrey immediately realized and bowed apologetically. That was my oversight. Please wait a moment. Audrey hurried to a cabinet on the side, and took out an exquisite handbag adorned with a full circle of pearls and gemstones. She then took out a large handful of banknotes, and many coins from it. The currency we use in loan consists of gold coins, silver coins, and copper coins. 1 gold pound is equal to 20 silver solii, and 1 silver solii is equal to 12 copper pence. Later, to make them easier to carry and circulate, corresponding banknotes were issued. Take a look. Lewis didn't take the banknotes but curiously picked up the coins instead. Feeling the coins, he found that the copper coin wasn't pure copper, that is, red copper, but rather a golden yellow brass. Similarly, the silver coin wasn't pure silver either, but a silver alloy mixed with other metals. Under Lewis's perception, the other metal should be aluminum. Compared to pure silver, this silver-aluminum alloy would form a protective oxide film on the surface, thereby resisting further oxidation and blackening. In contrast, the gold coins were of very high purity under Lewis's perception, with almost no other metals mixed in. When Lewis said no other metals were mixed in, he didn't mean absolutely none, but rather in comparison to all the other coins in front of him. Copper and silver coins had a fixed alloy ratio, while the other types of metals mixed into the gold coins varied, and their content was not only inconsistent, but also maintained at a very low level. The gold coins in Audrey's hand only had 2 denominations, 1 pound and 5 pounds. In fact, the pound here didn't mean the gold coin weighed 1 pound of gold. It actually meant that this 1 gold coin could be exchanged for 1 pound of silver. Its own weight seemed to be less than 8 grams to Lewis. Correspondingly, the 5-pound denomination gold coin weighed less than 40 grams. According to Audrey's thoughts, this ancient mysterious existence before her shouldn't be lacking in wealth. It was just that due to the changing times, he didn't have suitable modern currency to use. Sir, you have just woken up, so you probably don't have suitable currency on hand. Why not use these? If it's not enough, just let me know and I'll prepare more for you. Lewis smiled and shook his head. Thank you, but it's not necessary. In the next moment, Lewis's hands quickly formed seals in front of him, but the seals he formed were different from the 12 basic seals he had taught Audrey. Magnet release, gold dust. As Lewis pressed his hand onto the ground beneath him, Audrey watched him expectantly from the side, wanting to see what kind of miraculous ability this mysterious and powerful Mr. Six Paths would display next. However, she waited for a while and didn't see any changes in the surroundings. Seeing that Lewis still maintained his original posture, Audrey didn't make a sound and continued to wait. After about 10 minutes, Audrey suddenly noticed a faint and slender trail of dust flying into the room through the window, finally gathering around Lewis. This is... I felt it just now. That river crossing through this city actually has some fine gold sand deposited at the bottom. It can help me solve my temporary financial problems. These natural gold particles, formed by deposition in riverbeds after millions of years of weathering and transport by flowing water, actually had quite a high gold content, basically around 90%, and some could even reach 92%. One should know that the gold coins of the Lone Kingdom in front of him also had a gold content of around 90%. The difference between the two wasn't large. Lewis didn't plan to collect thousands of gold pieces for himself all at once. As long as it was enough for his temporary use, it would be fine. Even so, the gold sand flying in from outside the window continued for over 10 minutes. The reason it lasted so long was mainly because Lewis, with the intention of not causing trouble for others, maintained the stealth of these gold sands as they moved, so that others wouldn't discover them. Looking at the gold sand in front of him, Lewis's hands continued to form seals. Tiger, dog, horse, rat, fire release, Samadhi true fire. A clump of crimson flames surged out from Lewis's upturned palm. Even though Audrey was 3 meters away from the flames, she felt the intense heat immediately. Then, she saw the gold sand spontaneously throw itself into the flames under Lewis's control. At the same time, a cloud of black smoke and a strange smell diffused. Those were some impurities that had originally adhered to the surface of the gold sand when it was deposited at the bottom of the river, which were now being burned away by the flames. Soon, all the gold melted, turning into a large mass of liquid metal. Lewis didn't further separate the silver from this mass of liquid, not only because adding sulfur for layering would be troublesome, but mainly because Lewis was afraid that if the gold coins he produced were of too high purity, they might be considered fakes. So he simply controlled the large mass of liquid metal in front of him, using the gold pound Audrey had taken out as a template to begin shaping. Soon, over 40 gold coins fell from it, and the remaining residual gold was casually squeezed into the shape of a gold ingot by Lewis. Extinguishing the flames on his hand, Lewis reached out to beckon the gold coins over. Among them were 25-pound denomination coins and 27 1-pound denomination coins, worth a total of 127 pounds. Looking at the handful of gold coins in front of Lewis, Audrey picked up her handbag again. 6 paths, it would probably be inconvenient for you to go out with such a large pile of gold coins. Why not keep only a portion and let me exchange the rest for more portable banknotes? Lewis thought about it and didn't refuse. He kept only 10 gold coins and exchanged the rest with Audrey for banknotes. Not only that, Audrey also thoughtfully gave Lewis some copper and silver coins. If you don't want to attract attention, it's best to also carry some small change with you. This can save you from a lot of unnecessary trouble. Audrey spoke very sincerely because this was also her own personal experience. Lewis followed her advice and carried some of each type of coin with him. Seeing that everything was prepared, Lewis once again prepared to lift his foot and leave. But this time he was stopped by Audrey. "Mr. Six Paths, may I ask you something?" "Of course, no problem, provided that I know the answer." "It's nothing difficult. It's just the one you just used. Can I learn it too?" As the daughter of Earl Hall, a great banker, Audrey understood all too well what the ability of the person in front of her to create gold coins at almost no cost meant for a family or even a kingdom. But meeting Audrey's expectant gaze, Lewis shook his head this time. "It's hard to say. Remember what I told you. Basic elemental techniques are divided into fire release, wind release, water release, earth release, and lightning release. And the one I just used, as I think you heard, is called magnet release, gold dust, which is an existence that doesn't belong to the 5 basic elemental techniques mentioned above. If you want to use magnet release, the prerequisite is that you first need to cultivate wind release and lightning release to a top-tier level. After reaching this step, you need to try to fuse wind release and lightning release. The resulting product after success is magnet release. Everyone's innate conditions are different, and the attributes they naturally lean toward are also different. Some people might be naturally more suited for water release, while others might be naturally more suited for fire release. It's not certain. So you are skilled in wind release and lightning release, and thus combine them into magnet release, right? Lewis shook his head gently. No, it's not that I'm skilled in wind and lightning, but that I possess all 7 attributes. But aren't there only 5? Oh, I forgot to mention. Besides these 5, there are actually 2 hidden styles, Yin style and Yang style. You can roughly understand Yang style as life force. Its main manifestation is various enhancements and modifications to the physical body. Yin style can be understood as spiritual power, and its main manifestation is also reflected in this aspect. Then, how can I know which attribute I am more suited for? Lewis blinked. That. To be honest, I really hadn't thought about it before. Well, don't be in a hurry. First, work hard on your cultivation and strive to master the basics of chakra refinement as soon as possible. I'll think of a way during this time to see how I can make chakra paper, so that when you master the basics of chakra refinement, you can perform a test. I've caused you trouble. Lewis waved his hand and finally didn't stay any longer. He took a step and disappeared from Audrey's sight. When he reappeared, he was already in the shadows of a corner outside the villa's perimeter wall. When he used the Byakugan earlier, the vision was in black and white, and since he was in a room, he didn't pay much attention to the sky. But now that he was actually standing on the street, he felt that the environment here seemed a bit different from what he had imagined. The sky here was filled with pale yellow mist everywhere. Not only was the visibility poor, but there was also a faint smell in the air. Is this environment really okay? People living here for a long time will have problems, right? Or is the environment of this world just like this? Could it be similar to the hell of Western legends, naturally filled with the smell of sulfur? It must be said that the environment really affects one's mood. He was now frowning because of the color of the sky and the smell. Although Lewis was a newcomer, with Audrey's explanation, he had gained a general understanding of the place. Of course, this was also thanks to some special landmarks, which prevented him from getting lost. First was this King's Avenue in Empress Borough. Thanks to the well-maintained infrastructure of Empress Borough, he easily followed the avenue to this widest street in Backland. Lush vegetation was planted on both sides of the road, and in front of this vegetation were street lamps. There are street lamps. Gas lamps. I was wondering why something felt a bit off earlier. Now that I think about it, in a large noble family like Audrey's, I didn't seem to see any electric lights. It seems this world hasn't developed to the stage of electrical energy yet. Thinking of this, Lewis raised an eyebrow, feeling that he might be able to start from this aspect and leave his own mark on this world. But then his heart stirred as he thought of what Audrey had told him before, that there was a god here called the god of steam and machinery. If I were to popularize electrical energy, wouldn't I end up in a dispute with this deity? Chapter 10, Oravi Restaurant, 4K. After briefly orienting himself, Lewis began walking along King's Avenue. However, along the way, he attracted quite a few onlookers. This was because people noticed that while Lewis appeared quite respectable based on his attire, he was actually traveling a long distance on foot. For these respectable people, they would prefer to take a carriage even just to go across the street. Even those who didn't keep horses or have their own private carriages would choose to take a public carriage. It wasn't that these people were unwilling to move or so lacking in exercise that they couldn't walk a few steps. It was a way for them to flaunt their status. Even if, afterwards, they specifically engaged in activities like dancing, horse riding, or fencing just to exercise their bodies. Or rather, this entire set of behaviors was their complete proof of status. Only the truly wealthy and powerful upper class, who could maintain a well-proportioned and healthy physique while hardly walking a step in their daily lives, were considered to be in the perfect form. Those pseudo-middle-class individuals who only saw the surface-level behavior of the upper class taking carriages and blindly imitated them lacked the professional staff to help them maintain their figures and exercise. Consequently, they would either start losing their shape or begin suffering health issues. The true top tier viewed these blind followers as jokes, yet these people themselves treated these physical ailments as a new tool for social distinction to separate themselves from the poor. But regardless of which of the two categories they fell into, they all looked upon Lewis's current behavior with disdain. They felt he was trying to save face while suffering inside, unwilling to even spend the money to call a public carriage. Some even speculated with malice, who knows where this man got such a suit? Look at those cuffs, look at that collar, it doesn't look like it fits. Maybe he stole it. Lewis was unaware of these people's actions, and even if he had known, he wouldn't have cared. He continued to observe this pearl of the northern continent, as Audrey called it, with great curiosity. Lewis was inclined to agree with that description. In his view, the infrastructure here, without considering electrical technology, had already reached the level of second- or third-tier cities from before he transmigrated. Considering the industrial level of this era, Lewis felt it was quite impressive. Especially when he left Empress Borough and entered Hillsdon district. Looking at the rows of multi-story buildings here, he actually felt a sense of familiarity. Sigh, it's just that the distance is still missing some skyscrapers, otherwise, the vibe would be even more spot on, like being back in the European-style commercial streets of those old cities. With such thoughts in mind, Lewis strolled down the main street. The stock exchange, bank headquarters, the Royal Arsenal, the Mint. Although Lewis didn't enter these buildings and only observed them from a distance. Even so, he could feel the bustle within them. Among those coming and going, some showed deep exhaustion on their faces, while others were highly emotional. Some moved with urgency, while every action of others radiated fighting spirit. At that moment, he spotted a restaurant on the side of the road. Orvie Restaurant. It looks quite crowded. I wonder how the food is here. I hope it's not truly like ancient Europe in that regard. With mixed emotions, Lewis walked into the restaurant. The restaurant waiter had already noticed Lewis as he approached. Therefore, when he stepped toward the restaurant's main entrance, someone opened it from the inside ahead of him. Good day, sir. Welcome to our Orvie restaurant. Looking at the waiter's extended hands after bowing, Lewis followed the example of others, taking off his top hat and his outermost overcoat, and naturally handing them over. On this point, Lewis could only say that Chakra's enhancement of the five senses and physical control really played a significant role. Led by the waiter, Lewis arrived at a seat and sat down, while the waiter hung his coat and hat on a nearby rack. What are your specialties? Sir, this restaurant primarily serves Orvie specialties. We not only have deep-sea fish and shrimp shipped directly from Port Orvie, but we also have several local chefs from Port Orvie. It had to be said that this waiter was quite professional. Not only did he introduce the restaurant's specialties clearly, but he also maintained a perfectly timed smile throughout, and kept his body slightly leaned forward, making him beyond reproach. Having worked in the service industry before transmigrating, Lewis almost subconsciously drifted off into professional critique. It was precisely because he had been in the industry himself that he knew how excellently this waiter was performing. Don't underestimate this basic smile. He had handled complaints about such things before. When reviewing the reason for a complaint, the customer said they felt the employee's smile was too wide, as if they were mocking them. Pulling his thoughts back to the present, Lewis followed the waiter's recommendation and ordered a single serving of the restaurant's specialty food. Soon, a piping hot meal was served. A portion of fish fingers, a bowl of thick creamy mushroom cheese seafood soup, 3 slices of toast sautéed in butter, and a grilled fish. Actually, the waiter had also recommended lemon fish slices to Lewis, but he refused upon learning they were raw. Although his current body didn't fear any parasites, he personally couldn't accept it in his heart. Finally, Lewis also ordered a large glass of pineapple beer and a small portion of ice cream. The food in Lord of Mysteries is actually quite decent. To Lewis's palate, the food here tasted very good. Knowing that there had once been a transmigrator in this world, and a fellow countryman at that, Lewis didn't know if the food was naturally good, or if that fellow countryman had improved it. Eating the last bite of ice cream, Lewis let out a long breath. That sensation of cold, sweet ice cream with the aroma of fruit and milk after a heavy meal of fish and meat was simply the salvation of life. This meal truly delighted Lewis, sweeping away the gloom of being trapped in the void for who knows how long. Pineapple beer is 4 pence, ice cream is 1 soldi, fish fingers are 7 pence, mushroom soup is 9 pence, bread is 3 pence, and grilled fish is 1 soldi 4 pence, totaling for solely 3 pence. How should he put this price? Louis had previously gained a rough understanding of prices from Audrey. Later he learned about some job salaries from her, and combining the two gave him a general idea. According to his rough conversion, 1 gold pound was worth about 1,000 yuan. The ordinary workers in the stock exchange, banks, arsenals, and mints he saw earlier earned about 4 pounds a month, which converted to 4,000 yuan barely acceptable. Using this as a benchmark, it meant Louis's meal cost over 210 yuan. Considering this was the national capital and a restaurant in the commercial center, in that case, this price isn't too expensive, it might even be a bit cheap. However, I didn't expect this ice cream to be so expensive, actually catching up to the price of a main course. What Louis didn't know was that given Audrey's status, the so-called low-level workers she encountered weren't actually that ordinary. To look no further, the dock workers in Backland's dock district could only get 7 soldi a week even working every day, which added up to just over 1 pound a month. Even the maid's salary Audrey mentioned was actually Annie's salary, the personal maid of a noble lady, which was already among the top tier for maids. Ordinary maids responsible for laundry and chores only earned 4 or 5 soldi a week. Thus, the actual value of a gold pound could easily be double what Louis originally imagined. Unaware of this, Louis generously pulled out a 5 soldi note, indicating the rest was a tip for the waiter. Putting on his coat and hat amid the waiter's thanks, Louis was still reflecting on how high the quality of these waiters was. He had only given a 9 pence tip, yet the man was so enthusiastic it made him a bit embarrassed. In reality, those 9 pence were equal to the man's food expenses for a day or two. Full and satisfied, Louis strolled down the street once more. Perhaps due to his mood, Louis even felt the air wasn't as pungent anymore. Seeing that it was getting late, Louis decided it was time to solve his housing problem. According to Louis's plan, he needed to learn more about this world, and Backland, as the capital of the Kingdom of Loan, was undoubtedly a good place. As a political, economic, and even religious center, it would surely provide him with much useful intelligence. Since he planned to gather intelligence here, he naturally needed to find a long-term residence. In the vastness of Backland, Louis thought it over and felt the West District was the most suitable. While Empress Borough had an elegant environment and complete infrastructure, it was a residential area for top-tier nobles and the wealthy. A sudden outsider appearing there would be too conspicuous. The Hillsdon district beneath his feet, while prosperous and extravagant, was precisely because of that not very suitable for living. It was better for occasional shopping trips. The other areas, North Borough, Sherwood Borough, south of the bridge, and St. George district, were directly rejected by Louis because the Orthodox churches were located there. Of the remaining places, there weren't many choices. Louis paused and turned around, heading toward the West District. Audrey had mentioned that the West District had good security and complete living facilities, being second only to Empress Borough. Most importantly, Louis remembered her saying that many wealthy outsiders chose to settle in the West District. So as an outsider, he wouldn't seem too out of place there. As long as he maintained the persona of a wealthy outsider, he wouldn't attract too much attention. As for whether he could maintain a rich man's persona, Louis felt that while making money was hard to say, didn't he know how to spend it? It just so happened that the Tassoc River flowed through the West District. He planned to find a house near the river, so he wouldn't have to worry about funding. With a vast amount of funds to squander, Louis believed that even if his performance had some flaws, those people would choose to accept him for the sake of money and think it was just a rich man's peculiar quirk. While eating at the restaurant earlier, Louis's eyes and ears hadn't been idle. He not only listened to the conversations of the diners, but also observed the situation on the street outside the window. It was then that he realized why he had attracted so many glances earlier. So this time, he also boarded a public carriage. He chose a small single-horse carriage, which was a four-wheeled, double-shaft carriage. Since the carriage used straight shafts, to avoid putting the weight of the carriage on the horse, the carriage had to be raised so the shafts were level with the horse's back. As a result, the coachman's driving position became quite high, looking as if he were sitting on the roof. "Sir, where would you like to go?" "I plan to settle in Backland. After looking around, I feel the West District is most suitable. Take me to a housing rental and sales office in the West District." The coachman thought for a moment and said, "Sir, for housing rentals and sales in Backland, besides contacting the original owners directly, there are also some rental and sales companies. For instance, here in Sherwood Borough where we are now, there are also rental and sales companies. They should also have some property resources for the West District. What do you think?" Lewis thought about it. "Let's go to the West District anyway. The rental and sales companies there are closer, after all, so they should have more resources in the West District." "Yes, sir. Please sit tight, we are departing now." On the way, the coachman chatted with Lewis behind him while controlling the draft horse. The coachman, as a local, was far more familiar with Backland than Audrey was. He told him about many landmark buildings here, and could even say a few words about the general housing prices in the West District. Especially after Lewis indicated he would give him one solely for this carriage ride, the coachman's introductions became even more enthusiastic. "Sir, there are for rental and sales companies in the West District. I personally recommend you go to the Lance Housing Rental and Sales Company on Green Park Street. Compared to other companies, their service fees are slightly higher, but accordingly, the properties they have are the best among them. Most importantly, their reputation is guaranteed, which is much better than the others, especially for a gentleman like you." Although the coachman didn't spell it out, Lewis already understood the hidden message. Presumably, the other companies had used some small tricks when renting or selling properties to wealthy outsiders. It made sense, outsiders were new arrivals, and even if they suffered a small loss, they likely wouldn't seek trouble with them. Thinking this, Lewis nodded and agreed that he was right, so they would simply go to this Lance Housing Rental and Sales Company. It wasn't that Lewis completely believed the coachman, but rather that he didn't care. As long as the property was real, it didn't matter if he spent a bit more money. In any case, what he needed to portray next was a wealthy man who was also extravagant. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Novels Wonderland.